Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video.
But how, I cannot say, Dumbledore said. Ask him, shrieked Filch, turning his blotched and tear-stained face to Harry. No second year could have done this, said Dumbledore firmly. It would take dark magic of the most advanced.
He did it. He did it.
Filch spat, his pouchy face purpling. You saw what he wrote on the wall. He found in my office. He knows I'm a. Filch's face worked horribly. He knows I'm a squib, he finished. I never touched Mrs. Norris, Harry said loudly, uncomfortably aware of everyone looking at him, including all the Lockharts on the walls. And I don't even know what a squib is. Rubbish, snarled Filch. He saw my quick-spell letter. If I might speak, Headmaster, said Snape from the shadows, Potter and his friends may have simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, he said, a slight sneer curling his mouth as though he doubted it. But we do have a set of suspicious circumstances here. Why wasn't he at the Halloween feast? Professor Nick, the Gryffindor Tower ghost, invited us to his Death Day party. We were there, Chris answered quickly. But why not join the feast afterwards? Said Snape, looking at Chris, his black eyes glittering in the candlelight. Because, Harry stammered. Because the feast ended, Professor. We wanted to visit the Great Hall, but before we could, we realized the feast ended, Chris said confidently, looking at Snape. But Snape's nasty smile widened as he noticed Harry's nervous face. I suggest, Headmaster, that Potter and his friends are not being entirely truthful, he said. It might be a good idea if he were deprived of certain privileges until he is ready to tell us the whole story. I personally feel he should be taken off the Gryffindor Quidditch team until he is ready, to be honest. Really, Severus, said Professor McGonagall sharply, I see no reason to stop the boy playing Quidditch. This cat wasn't hit over the head with a broomstick. There is no evidence at all that Potter has done anything wrong. Professor Dumbledore looked at Harry and Chris for a few seconds. Chris didn't change her confident and calm expression. Dumbledore nodded. Innocent until proven guilty, Severus, he said firmly. Snape looked furious. So did Filch. My cat has been petrified. Filch shrieked, his eyes popping. I want to see some punishment. We will be able to cure her, Argus, said Dumbledore patiently. Professor Sprout recently managed to procure some mandrakes. As soon as they have reached their full size, I will have a potion made that will revive Mrs. Norris. I'll make it, Lockhart butted in. I must have done it 100 times. I could whip up a mandrake restorative draught in my sleep. Excuse me, said Snape icily, but I believe I am the potions master at this school. There was a very awkward pause. You may go, Dumbledore said to Chris, Harry, Ron, and Hermione. They went, as quickly as they could. When they were a floor up from Lockhart's office, Harry turned into an empty classroom. Chris, Ron, and Hermione followed him and closed the door quietly behind them. What are we doing here? Chris said to Harry. Harry, you don't think that you would have saved Mrs. Norris if I hadn't stopped you, do you? Are you crazy? If you hadn't stopped him, then we would be the first ones there. The entire school would have seen us with that cat, though Filch still suspects Harry. They don't have any proof. Ron answered. Yeah, you saved us there, Hermione added. Yes. If you hadn't stopped me, then maybe I would be returning home by now. Thanks, Chris, said Harry. But why didn't you told them about the voice? I thought it was going to sound very far-fetched, especially when we don't have any proof, and after hearing Professor Snape, I didn't want to say something which could be used against us. Chris answered. Harry nodded. Hearing voices no one else can hear isn't a good sign, even in the wizarding world, Harry, Ron said. Something in Ron's voice made Harry ask, You all believe me? Of course we do, said Ron quickly, but you must admit it's weird. I know it's weird, said Harry. The whole thing is weird. What was that writing on the wall about? The chamber has been opened. What's that supposed to mean? You know, it rings a sort of bell, said Ron slowly. I think someone told me a story about a secret chamber at Hogwarts once. Might have been Bill. And what about the second part? Enemies of the heir. Who's the heir? And why only the Muggle-borns are his enemy? Well, according to Malfoy, Chris said. I am sure he knows something about it more than we do, Hermione said suspiciously. And what on earth's a squib? Said Harry. To everyone's surprise, Ron stifled a snigger. Well, it's not funny really, but as it's Filch, he said. A squib is someone who was born into a wizarding family but hasn't got any magic powers. Kind of the opposite of Muggle-born wizards, but squibs are quite unusual. If Filch is trying to learn magic from a quick-spell course, I reckon he must be a squib. It would explain a lot, like why he hates students so much. Ron gave a satisfied smile. He's bitter. That's really not nice of you, Ron. Anyone could be bitter if they see so many people doing magic around them for years. but couldn't do it by themselves. It's sad, Chris said, and Ron shrugged. The clock chimed somewhere. Midnight, said Harry. We'd better get to bed before Snape comes along and tries to frame us for something else. After a long adventure, Chris finally fell into her bed, but as soon as she drifted to sleep, her nightmares arrived. Chris felt like she was standing in some kind of room. She saw everything clearly, heard everything clearly, and felt everything clearly. A man in red and golden robes entered the room. She found the man very familiar. What was all that about? He asked, looking at Chris. Chris didn't understand why the person is talking to her, but then a voice came from behind her. I did what is right. Chris turned around and saw another man in green and silver robes standing there. He also looked familiar.
No, you did what you thought is right.
Salazar. The man in red and golden robes replied. Only now Chris understood why they looked so familiar. She had seen portraits of the 4 founders of Hogwarts, and right now she was standing before them. The man in green and silver robes was Salazar Slytherin, and the man in red and golden robes was Godric Gryffindor. She gasped. Salazar Slytherin came towards Godric Gryffindor. I think and I know I did the right thing, Godric. No, you didn't, Salazar, Godric Gryffindor said, raising his voice. Not accepting all Muggle-born students in Hogwarts is not the right thing. It is Godric. When will you understand that the Muggles always will be our enemies? They never understood the creation of this magical world, and they never will. They will. If their own children will be part of this world, then they will understand. When will you let go of the past? Salazar. Never. The past is a part of me. I cannot let it go. Leave me, Godric. Did you forget what they did to Helga or Rowena or you? I didn't forget anything, Salazar. Neither do Rowena or Helga. But they made peace with this. They want to teach the Muggle-borns. They want to share their gifts with the other gifted children. I am still saying you will regret this, Godric. You all will. Salazar Slytherin said and left. Chris looked around carefully. She felt like if she made any noise, Godric Gryffindor will notice her. Then she saw a beautiful, proud-looking lady in blue and silver robes, wearing jewelry made with sapphires, stood on the doorway. It's an illusion that people can change others. People only change when they want to, she said. Rowena, Godric Gryffindor said without looking at her. No matter how much you want or try, you have to understand, Godric, that you cannot change Salazar. Rowena Ravenclaw said with a calm and wise tone. Godric Gryffindor sighed. He never told me why he hated Muggles that much. I know we all have faced many problems in the past because of the Muggles, but I never knew what happened to him. Neither do I. Only Helga knows what happened. She met Salazar first. Rowena Ravenclaw replied. Suddenly, Chris started to feel dizzy, like the room was spinning. Then she found herself at the entrance of the castle, where she saw Salazar Slytherin was leaving, and a lady in yellow robes called him. He stopped. Is this your final decision, Salazar? She asked. Yes, Helga. I know you 3 are capable of taking care of this school, he answered. We are, but what about your house? Helga Hufflepuff asked. Rowena will teach them. Godric is an also good teacher. He stopped, then said, and I believe you will take care of them like your own students. And he left. Helga Hufflepuff watched him leave. Chris woke up from her dream. Her head was spinning. What was all that about? Chris saw it's late morning and she was only one sleeping in her room. She was thinking she should tell anyone about her weird dream or not, as she made her way down to the common room and found Ginny surrounded by her brothers. Ginny was sitting on an armchair crying while her brothers Percy, Fred, George, and Ron were trying to stop her. Chris came close and heard Ron saying, "But you haven't really got to know Mrs. Norris. Honestly, we're much better off without her." Ginny's lip trembled. Stuff like this doesn't often happen at Hogwarts. Ron assured her. They'll catch the maniac who did it and have him out of here in no time. I just hope he's got time to petrify Filch before he is expelled. I'm only joking, Ron added. Still not nice, Ron, Chris said, coming closer. Ron looked up at her. Ask her. She was with us. We are not going to get expelled or anything, he said to Ginny. As soon as Ginny saw her, she tried to stop crying and was trying not to look vulnerable in front of her. You okay, Ginny? Chris asked as she kneeled in front of Ginny. I'm fine, Ginny answered. It's fine, Ginny. I also feel bad for Mrs. Norris. No one deserves that, Chris said with a sad look. No need to worry about me or Mrs. Norris, Chris. We both will be fine, Ginny said while straightening herself. What? Chris looked surprised. You heard me, Ginny said, and went upstairs. I never saw Ginny as that, Fred said. Neither do I, George replied. Did anything happen between you two? Ron asked, seeing Chris's shocked face. I don't know. She took a deep breath. I mean, we had a little argument last night, but I never thought even after this dangerous situation, she will talk to me like that. True, it's like she is not herself nowadays, Percy said. Chris felt a hand on her shoulder. It was George. Hey, don't worry, she is just upset over many things right now, it will be fine, he said with a smile. Chris sighed. I hope so. The Weasleys went for their own work and Chris sat alone on an armchair. Hermione came to her.
Chris, I'm going to the library. You want to come?
Why? Chris asked. Look, I forgot the legend of that secret chamber. It's in the Hogwarts of history. I didn't bring mine from home, so I wanted to check in the library.
No need. I have that book in my room, Chris answered.
Then bring it. We have to read, Hermione said urgently. Okay. The same evening as Harry returned from his Quidditch practice, all four of them gathered in the far corner of the common room. Chris opened the book and started reading. The Legend of Chamber of Secrets. For many years, the founders Godric Gryffindor, Rowena Ravenclaw, Helga Hufflepuff, and Salazar Slytherin worked in harmony together, seeking out youngsters who showed signs of magic and bringing them to the castle to be educated. But then disagreements sprang up between them. A rift began to grow between Slytherin and the others. Slytherin wished to be more selective about the students admitted to Hogwarts. He believed that magical learning should be kept within all magic families. He disliked taking students of Muggle parentage, believing them to be untrustworthy. After a while, there was a serious argument on the subject between Slytherin and Gryffindor, and Slytherin left the school. But before he left, Slytherin had built a hidden chamber in the castle of which the other founders knew nothing. Slytherin had sealed the Chamber of Secrets so that none would be able to open it until his own true heir arrived at the school. The heir alone would be able to unseal the Chamber of Secrets, unleash the horror or the monster within, which the heir of Slytherin alone can control, and use it to purge the school of all who unworthy to study magic. Chris finished and there was a silence, a few seconds. Chris was thinking about her dream, which was very similar to this story. She saw Godric Gryffindor and Salazar Slytherin arguing, then Salazar Slytherin leaving the school. I always knew Salazar Slytherin was a twisted old loony. Ron broke the silence. But I never knew he started all this pure-blood stuff. I wouldn't bet in his house if you paid me. Honestly, if the Sorting Hat had tried to put me in Slytherin, I'd got the train straight back home. Don't judge a book by its cover, Ron, Chris said. Meaning, Ron asked. Meaning we never met Salazar Slytherin or didn't hear anything about him other than this story. Did we? We know as much as the rumors told us. Then how do we know he was bad? Chris explained. But what about the book? It's written in it, the book can't be wrong. Hermione protested. Books can be wrong sometimes, Hermione. But I don't think this book is wrong. The writer wrote this very cleverly, and I believe he also didn't believe that Salazar Slytherin was bad. How? Hermione asked. Read between the lines, Hermione. The legend didn't say that the monster within the chamber will be out to kill Muggleborns, but to kill those who are untrustworthy to study magic. Chris pointed out the lines, but according to Slytherin, Muggleborns are untrustworthy. See here. Hermione still didn't want to believe. But where is written that the monster will kill those who are untrustworthy, according to Slytherin? Chris asked. It's Slytherin's monster, Chris. Of course it will work according to him. No, Hermione. Because he himself never freed the monster. He said his heir will. So maybe like us, his heir also thought that he wanted to kill the Muggleborns. However, he meant something else. As Chris said this, Hermione didn't say anything. Though she wasn't fully convinced, she was considering Chris's words. Ron looked dumbfolded and Harry almost clapped. You are a genius, Chris, Harry said, grinning. Chris smiled. So now what? Hermione asked, getting back to the topic. Now we have to find who is the heir of Slytherin, Chris said. 2 days later, Colin came to Chris. Hiya, Chris, he said, and sat beside her. Yes, Colin, Chris said. Do you mind if I ask you something? No. Go ahead. Where were you and Ginny at the Halloween feast? I and Luna waited for you, but you didn't come, Colin said. Yes, I was at Nick's death day party and Ginny was... Wait, Ginny wasn't at the feast? No, Colin said slowly, looking like he said something he shouldn't have. Well, I will be on my way. It's just I need your little help. Speak, Chris said while thinking about Ginny. Chris, I have a picture of that wall, he whispered. You what? Chris almost shouted. Shh. No one should know. I took it secretly. I know I can trust you. Will you keep it? I don't want to keep it with me. The boys in my room will be furious if they see it, he whispered urgently. Fine, give it, Chris said, and Colin handed her a small moving picture. In the picture, the fire and torch was quivering, and on the wall the words were shining, "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware." For a few days the school could talk of little else but the attack on Mrs. Norris. Filch kept it fresh in everyone's minds by pacing the spot where she had been attacked, as though he thought the attacker might come back. Harry had seen him scrubbing the message on the wall with Mrs. Scour's all-purpose magical mess remover, but to no effect. The words still gleamed as brightly as ever on the stone. When Filch wasn't guarding the scene of the crime, he was skulking red-eyed through the corridors, lunging out at unsuspecting students and trying to put them in detention for things like breathing loudly and looking happy. Meanwhile, Hermione and Chris had searched the library about that monster in the chamber. They agreed on the fact that if Professor Dumbledore is unable to fix Mrs. Norris, then the attacker was definitely not a human. They found many magical beasts who have the ability to petrify. Other than that, Colin told Chris that there were rumors that people were suspecting Harry as the heir of Slytherin, and on the other hand, Ron and Harry were sure that the heir of Slytherin was none other than Draco Malfoy. Hermione has her doubts on it, but Chris was sure it was not him. She explained that a big-mouthed person like Malfoy will never be able to keep a secret like that, so maybe he knows something more about the chamber, but he was definitely not the heir. In the beginning, Chris was admiring Hermione's knowledge about books, but soon she realized that that girl was obsessed with books. She could read books for 24 hours. Chris's head was spinning because of reading so many books in a few days. At last, she gave up and leave it to Hermione and ask her if she found any other clue, then she will join her. Hermione wasn't pleased by this, but Chris gave the excuse of her long classes and piled homework, so Hermione agreed. Luckily, Chris hadn't had any nightmare recently. Ginny was now completely ignoring her. She had stopped talking to Chris. Chris also didn't want to interfere anymore. She was mostly hanging around with Luna and Colin or Hermione, Harry and Ron. Chris and Colin walked to the potions class one afternoon, which they had with the Slytherins. Professor Snape asks them to partner up for practice. Ginny obviously went as far as possible from Chris. Colin tried to partner up with Chris, but Professor Snape stopped him and asked Chris to partner up with some Mr. Foley. Chris went and stood next to him. "Hi," Chris said as politely as possible. Crush the ingredients. "We are here for work, not for small talks," he said, without looking at her. Fine." She started to crush the ingredients. "You're doing it the wrong way," he said, looking at her work. But Professor Snape showed it like this. No, he didn't. "Look," he said as he took the crushing bowl from Chris. During the potion making, no matter how much Chris tried, Jason said she was doing wrong. At last, she felt irritated.
"If you know everything, then you do it. Stop ordering me like that."
She snapped at him. "Fine," said Jason. As he started working, Chris just watched in amazement that Jason had done most of the work in a few minutes. After a few more steps, Jason informed Professor Snape that they are missing one ingredient, and Professor Snape took him to collect that thing. As they left, Chris saw there was nothing left to do for her. So she sighed and looked around. Everyone else was working. Ginny was working with a Gryffindor boy, while Colin worked with a dangerous-looking Slytherin boy. Colin was looking very nervous. Chris looked back at her table and saw a notebook. It was under Jason's bag. She lifted the bag and saw the recipe of the same potion they were working on. "So, this is how he knows every step before me," she thought, and turned some pages. The notebook had lots of recipes of different kind of potions, and everything was handwritten. Suddenly, a potion attracted her attention. It's a light truth serum, and also at the end of the recipe, there was a signature of Professor Snape. That means Professor Snape know about this. Excitedly, Chris read how to make it and what happens if someone consumes it. She wrote the recipe in her notebook, and before Jason came back, she placed his bag and the notebook the way it was before. At the end of the class, Snape checked everyone's potions, and as Chris expected, Chris and Jason's potion was better than everyone. Snape gave 5 marks to Slytherin and 3 marks to Gryffindor. Of course, he saw who did most of the work. One evening, Chris sat with Harry, Ron, and Hermione in Gryffindor common room. When they told her what they had found, spiders. Really? Yeah. The spiders were scuttling, apparently fighting to get through a small crack. A long, silvery thread was dangling like a rope, as though they had all climbed it in their hurry to get outside. Hermione explained. "Can't you talk about something else? Like maybe where the water came from?" Ron said fiercely. "It's okay, Ron. Everyone fears something. Relax," she said, then turned towards Hermione. "So, Myrtle said anything?" "No," she said. "She didn't see anything. But I think, as usual, she flooded the place, and that explains the water under Mrs. Norris," said Hermione. "That makes sense, but we are still stuck. Who can be the heir?" Chris said, thinking. About that, Chris, we think we should at least check on Malfoy. You have to admit he is a very obvious suspect, Hermione said. Ron and Harry nodded in agreement. And that's why I think it's not him, said Chris inside. But if you three think so, then it doesn't hurt to be sure. Exactly. But how? Harry asked. There might be a way, said Hermione slowly, dropping her voice still further with a quick glance across the room at Percy. Of course, it would be difficult. And dangerous. Very dangerous. We'd be breaking about 50 school rules, I expect. If in a month or so you feel like explaining, you will let us know, won't you? Said Ron irritably. All right, said Hermione coldly. What we'd need to do is to get inside the Slytherin common room and ask Malfoy a few questions without him realizing it's us. All we'd need would be some polyjuice potion. What's that? Said Ron and Harry together. Wait. No need to use polyjuice potion. Chris stopped Hermione. Then how? Hermione asked. If we need truth, why not use the truth serum? Chris smirked. What? But truth serum is controlled by the ministry. We can't just... Hermione said, getting irritated. It's not the potion controlled by ministry. I found a recipe with less complicated preparation and less complicated effects, Chris said. Are you sure it will work? Hermione asked skeptically. No. That's why we will first test it on Harry and Ron. Chris grinned. What? Harry and Ron said together. Before using us for the experiment, will you two tell us what are you talking about? Harry asked, getting impatient. Yeah. What is polyjuice potion and what is less complicated truth serum? Ron added, polyjuice potion transforms you into somebody else. And truth serum is something that forces you to spill all your secrets. But the recipe I have will only make the speaker answer in yes or no, and the effect will wear off in 10-15 minutes. Chris explained. And first you will try that on them? Hermione asked. Yeah, I want to see how it works. It will be easy to make a trap for Malfoy after that. And don't worry, Professor Snape passed the recipe, that means it's safe. Chris said, and Harry and Ron gasped. Oh, it will be fine then. We will make sure, Hermione said, but Harry and Ron still looked unsure. You want to know about Malfoy or not? Chris asked. They nodded. Then it's settled. We are going to make that serum, Hermione said, looking happier. Chris smiled. Saturday morning, Chris was going to see her first Quidditch match. She got up early, dressed, and went down to breakfast with Colin. Colin was excited to take loads of pictures. Luna joined them at breakfast. They talked a little about Quidditch. Finally, when they saw it's time for the match, 3 of them went towards the field. They met Ron and Hermione there. It was a muggy sort of day with a hint of thunder in the air. All 5 of them hurriedly went to wish Harry good luck as he went to the locker rooms. After some time, the Gryffindor Quidditch team entered the field, and a roar of noise greeted them. Mainly cheers because Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff were anxious to see Slytherin beaten, but the Slytherins in the crowd made their boos and hisses heard too. Madam Hooch, the Quidditch teacher, asked Flint and Wood to shake hands, which they did, giving each other threatening stares. On my whistle, said Madam Hooch. 3 bowed, 2... With a roar from the crowd to speed them upward, the 14 players rose toward the leaden sky. Harry flew higher than any of them, squinting around for the snitch, but suddenly a heavy black bludger came pelting toward Harry. He avoided it so narrowly and it passed ruffling his hair. George went streaking past him with his club in his hand, ready to knock the bludger back toward a Slytherin. Chris saw George give the bludger a powerful whack in the direction of a Slytherin team member, but the bludger changed direction in midair and shot straight for Harry again. Harry dropped quickly to avoid it and George managed to hit it hard toward Malfoy. Once again, the bludger swerved like a boomerang and shot at Harry's head. Harry put on a burst of speed and zoomed toward the other end of the pitch, taking the bludger behind him. It isn't normal, is it? Chris asked Hermione. No. Something is wrong. Bludgers never concentrated on one player like this. It was their job to try and unseat as many people as possible. Hermione replied, looking equally worried. Fred Weasley was waiting for the bludger at the other end. Harry ducked as Fred swung at the bludger with all his might. The bludger was knocked off course, but as though it was magnetically attracted to Harry, the bludger pelted after him once more, and Harry was forced to fly off at full speed. It had started to rain. Chris was looking at Harry and didn't realize what is going on other than that. Finally, she looked around when she heard Lee Jordan, who was commentating, say, Slytherin lead. 60 points to 20. Oh no, Hermione whispered. I'm sure the Slytherins had done something to that bludger, Ron said, fuming. Colin was clicking pictures non-stop. Luna was watching the match dreamily. Madam Hooch's whistle rang out and Harry, Fred, and George dived for the ground, still trying to avoid the mad bludger. The Gryffindor team huddled together while Slytherins in the crowd jeered. I hope they inform Madam Hooch about the bludger, or it will kill Harry today, Hermione said. The rain was falling more heavily now. After a few minutes on Madam Hooch's whistle, Harry kicked hard into the air and heard the telltale whoosh of the bludger behind him. Higher and higher Harry climbed. He looped and swooped, spiraled, zigzagged, and rolled.
They didn't say anything?
Chris asked, surprised. But why? Hermione was surprised too. Does he want to go to the hospital wing from here? Chris said as she saw Harry avoiding another fierce drive from the bludger. Slytherin started to laugh as the bludger missed him again. He turned right over and sped in the opposite direction. Chris sighed and looked around when she saw it, the most awaited golden snitch. It was hovering inches above Malfoy's left ear, and Malfoy, busy laughing at Harry, hadn't seen it. "Look, the snitch!" Chris shouted, and everyone turned around her. "There," she pointed at Malfoy. "Really? He didn't realize it was flying around him? Idiot," Ron said, laughing. Chris looked at Harry to see if he had seen it. Harry was doing a stupid kind of twirl in midair to dodge the bludger, and he fled, the bludger trailing a few feet behind him, and then he turned around to look at Malfoy and stopped. Chris understood he saw the snitch, but in the next second, the bludger had hit him at last, smashed into his elbow. OWDWD. "It must be broken," said Ron. "It will hurt," Luna said. Chris didn't say anything and watched as Harry dives towards Malfoy with his broken arm. With a splattering thud, he hit the mud and rolled off his broom. His one arm was hanging at a very strange angle, and another hand was holding the snitch. As soon as Madam Hooch whistle sounded, Chris, Hermione, and Ron ran towards Harry, Colin, Luna, and many others following behind. But before them, Lockhart reached there. Harry was unconscious. Lockhart took out his wand. "He will be fine in a minute." The crowd gathered around them. Colin was about to click his camera when Chris held the camera and Colin stopped. Harry opened his eyes and saw Lockhart. "Oh no, not you," he moaned. "Doesn't know what he's saying," said Lockhart loudly to anxious crowd. "Not to worry, Harry. I'm about to fix your arm." "No," said Harry. "I'll keep it like this, thanks." He tried to get up. Professor, we will take Harry to the hospital wing," Chris said, trying to save Harry. "Don't worry, Miss Norton. It's a simple charm I've used countless times," said Lockhart soothingly. "Why can't I just go to the hospital wing?" said Harry through clenched teeth. "He should really, Professor," said a muddy Wood, who couldn't help grinning even though his seeker was injured. "Great capture, Harry. Really spectacular. Your best yet, I'd say." "Stand back," said Lockhart, who was rolling up his jade green sleeves.
"No, don't," said Harry weakly.
"Please, Professor, Madame Pomfrey will be furious if you do her job," Chris said. Professor Lockhart looked up at her and missed Harry's injured hand. The spell hit on Harry's other hand, which was perfectly all right. Everyone watched shocked as Harry's other hand looked like a thick, flesh-colored rubber glove. Harry's arm was boneless. "Kill me," Chris shouted in her brain. Said Lockhart. "If only you hadn't distracted me, Miss Norton, though I guess you are right. I don't want to meddle in her job." Madame Pomfrey wasn't at all pleased. "You should have come straight to me," she raged, holding up the sad, limp remainder of what, half an hour before, had been a working arm. "I can mend bones in a second. So your one arm will be fine in a minute, but growing the bones back, you will be able to, won't you?" said Harry desperately. "I'll be able to, certainly, but it will be painful," said Madame Pomfrey grimly, throwing Harry a pair of pajamas. "You'll have to stay the night." After helping Harry into the hospital wing, Luna and Colin left. Honestly, Harry didn't want Colin to be there. He was furious Colin will take pictures of his broken arm and boneless arm. Hermione and Chris waited outside the curtain drawn around Harry's bed while Ron helped him into his pajamas. "How can you stick up for Lockhart now, Hermione, eh?" Ron called through the curtain. If Harry had wanted deboning, he would have asked. "Anyone can make a mistake," said Hermione, giving a side glance to Chris. "And don't forget he was distracted by Chris. I think if she hadn't interfered then—" "Sorry," Chris muttered. "I didn't mean to. I was just—" Chris and Hermione came around the curtain. "It's okay, Chris. I know you were just trying to save me. And trust me, it doesn't hurt anymore," Harry said, trying to sit up on the bed. "It just doesn't do anything else either." As he swung himself onto the bed, his arm flapped pointlessly. Chris bit her lips. Madame Pomfrey came around holding a large bottle of something labeled Skelegro. "You're in for a rough night," she said, pouring out a steaming beakerful and handing it to him. "Regrowing bones is a nasty business." As Harry drank the Skelegro, he coughed and spluttered. Madame Pomfrey retreated, leaving Chris, Hermione, and Ron to help Harry gulp down some water. "We won, though," said Ron, a grin breaking across his face. "That was some catch you made." Malfoy's face, he looked ready to kill. "I want to know how he fixed that bludger," said Hermione darkly. "We can add that to the list of questions we'll ask him when we'll give him the truth serum," said Harry, sinking back onto his pillows and looking at Chris. Chris didn't say anything. Pure guilt was written on her face. Suddenly, the door of the hospital wing burst open at that moment, filthy and soaking wet. The rest of the Gryffindor team had arrived to see Harry. Unbelievable flying, Harry, said George. I've just seen Marcus Flint yelling at Malfoy. Something about having the snitch on top of his head and not noticing. Malfoy didn't seem too happy. They had brought cakes, sweets, and bottles of pumpkin juice. They gathered around Harry's bed and were just getting started on what promised to be a good party when Madame Pomfrey came storming over, shouting, "This boy needs rest. He's got 33 bones to regrow." Out. Everyone started to leave, but Chris didn't move. As everyone left, Chris turned towards Harry. Sorry, Harry. I thought listening that Lockhart will not do anything with your hand, but I was wrong. Because of me, I am so sorry, Chris said in trembling voice. It's really fine, Chris. I will be all right by tomorrow, I guess. Don't worry, it's not your fault. If you hadn't said anything, my broken hand would have been boneless. Lockhart was going to do that anyway. Harry tried to smile. Chris nodded without smiling. You take rest. I will see you later, she said, and left. At dinner, Gryffindor's table were celebrating their victory over Slytherins. Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs also joined them. Chris, Colin, and Luna sat together. Colin took many pictures of the Gryffindor team and others celebrating. Everyone was happy. Fred and George were singing a song about Harry's courage and Malfoy's stupidity. Chris, Colin said while eating. Yeah, Colin? Chris asked. Well, I was thinking if you want to come with me to the hospital wing. Hospital wing? Yes, I was thinking to give Harry some fruits and ask him how is he. Colin said. It's late, Colin. You want to go after dinner? You can do it tomorrow. No. Please. I wanted to. Now. Please? I would have gone alone, but I think if I go alone I'll make a fool out of myself. Colin made a sad face. Fine. Don't go alone. It's not safe. I'll go, Chris said, smiling. After dinner they said bye to Luna and went towards the hospital wing. Do you think he will like grapes? Colin asked while excitedly walking. I think yes. Chris chuckled, seeing his face. You know, I can feel if it wasn't for you, then I'll never get a chance to talk to Harry. You know, people doesn't take me very seriously. He grinned. Though I don't have many friends, I know. You're a great friend, Chris. Chris just smiled and felt something passing behind them. Chris sharply turned around and got a glimpse of a robe. Without saying anything, Chris tried to follow the person. Who are you? Chris! Chris! Colin called from behind and tried to follow Chris. Chris turned a corner and found an empty hallway. She looked around, but no one was there. I swear I saw you. Can it be the air? She sighed. Then a dangerous thought hit her. If the air was here, then he will attack someone. She turned and saw Colin was not behind her. She ran. There was no sound of Colin. Chris's heart started to beat fast in fear, and then she saw her fear coming true. Colin was on the floor, clutching his camera in front of his face, completely stiff and still like a statue. Colin! Chris shouted as she ran towards Colin. She touched his hand, which was hard as a stone. Chris started to sweat. What to do? What to do? Just then someone came towards them. Miss Norton? Chris looked up and saw Professor McGonagall. Professor McGonagall was shocked to see Colin. What happened, Miss Norton? Professor Dumbledore came from another side. Albus, Professor McGonagall said as he saw him. Professor Dumbledore looked at Chris and Colin. To the hospital wing, he ordered. Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall carried Colin's statue-like body. Chris was following them behind. She felt like someone was stabbing her heart. The guilt of Harry's hand injury wasn't even gone when this happened to Colin. Ginny wasn't talking to her either. She clenched her fist. She was angry with herself. As they placed Colin on a bed in hospital wing, "Get Madame Pomfrey," whispered Dumbledore, and Professor McGonagall hurried to get Madame Pomfrey. Soon Professor McGonagall came back, followed by Madame Pomfrey. She took a sharp breath. What happened? Madame Pomfrey whispered to Dumbledore, bending over the statue on the bed. Another attack, said Dumbledore, but I think Miss Norton will able to explain what happened. Madame Pomfrey noticed Chris, who was standing near the wall. She was there too? Madame Pomfrey asked, looking surprised. Yes. I was passing by when I heard Miss Norton scream, said Professor McGonagall. What happened, Miss Norton? Chris was trembling. She took a few deep breaths, then said, Colin wanted to meet Harry and give some fruits to him. He asked me to come with him. I agreed. We were on our way to here when I saw... Chris paused. You saw what? Professor McGonagall asked hurriedly. I saw someone's robes. Someone was hiding from us. I tried to follow that person but couldn't find him or her, and by the time I came back, Colin was on the floor. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have left him alone. Chris's voice trembled again. Professor, is he also petrified? Yes? Said Professor Dumbledore, and I think if you would have been there with him then you could have been attacked too. All of them stared down at Colin. Then Dumbledore leaned forward and wrenched the camera out of Colin's rigid grip. You don't think he managed to get a picture of his attacker? Said Professor McGonagall eagerly. Dumbledore opened the back of the camera. Good gracious, said Madame Pomfrey. A jet of steam had hissed out of the camera. There was a strong smell of burnt plastic. Melted, said Madame Pomfrey wonderingly. All melted. Chris gathered herself and asked directly to Professor Dumbledore. It's the monster within the chamber, isn't Professor? This time her voice wasn't trembling, nor there was fear. It was a determination in her voice. Miss Norton! Professor McGonagall tried to stop Chris, but Professor Dumbledore said, It's all right, Minerva, they have the right to know. He looked at Chris. Yes. Miss Norton. I also think the same. And it means that the Chamber of Secrets is indeed open again. Madame Pomfrey clapped a hand to her mouth. Professor McGonagall stared at Dumbledore. But who? The question is not who, said Dumbledore, his eyes on Colin. The question is how. Is that mean Professor Dumbledore knows who the heir is? Or he thinks who opened the chamber is less important than how that person opened it? Minerva, I will ask you to escort Miss Norton to the Gryffindor Tower. I think she should not go alone. Professor Dumbledore's voice brought Chris back from her thoughts. Sure, Professor McGonagall said and turned towards Chris. Chris nodded and was about to leave the wing when Dumbledore's voice sounded again. Try not to wander around alone, Miss Norton. Chris looked back at Colin and left. That night was very difficult for Chris. She wanted to let out her anger, guilt, pain. She wanted to scream, but there was no way. She went to her room and silently fell on her bed. Her eyes were sleepless. She stared at the window for hours. Finally, when she closed her eyes, her nightmares came back. She was in the middle of the forest, standing in front of Godric Gryffindor and Salazar Slytherin. They were standing face to face, glaring at each other. I am asking you for the last time. Where is the chamber? Salazar, Godric Gryffindor roared. Do you think after insulting me, you will get an answer from me? Salazar Slytherin answered angrily. I didn't say anything wrong about you. You're selfish and only think about yourself. We asked you to make the chamber defend our school from enemies, not to encourage your low intentions. That is enough, Godric. Who are you to talk about low intentions? You are asking about the chamber so that you can kill what is inside it. Salazar said angrily. Yes, I do, to save my students. You mean the Muggleborns? Don't worry, Muggles are cowards. They always try to destroy the unknown, and when they couldn't able to destroy it, they run away from it. They will run away from Hogwarts in no time. After listening to the tale of my secret chamber, he smiled. I will make sure they don't, Salazar. I will prove you wrong, Godric said, clenching his fist. Chris woke up. After leaving the dormitory, Chris didn't want to go for breakfast, but out of habit, her legs brought her to Great Hall. As she realized she was in Great Hall, she turned to leave. Where are you going? Luna came in front of her. Without thinking, Chris hugged Luna. Luna didn't give any sign of feeling surprised and patted Chris's back. There. After some time, they sat on a table and Chris told Luna about Colin. Surprisingly, she was feeling much better. Stop beating yourself over it, Chris. It's not your fault. I don't. Before Chris can finish, Hermione and Ron came towards her running. Chris, is that true? Colin? Hermione was out of words. Yes, I was with him, Chris whispered. Really? What happened? Ron asked. Chris repeated everything, what she saw and what happened. We have to start our work, Chris. We can't wait anymore, Hermione said after listening to everything. Chris looked at Luna, debating that she should say anything about their investigations or not. It's all right. Tell me when you feel like it. I'm always here to listen or talk. I trust you, Luna said and gave a big smile. Thanks, Luna. I'll tell you soon, Chris said, gave her a quick hug and left with Ron and Hermione. They quickly gathered the ingredients from the student's store cupboard, but 2 ingredients were not there. Hermione assured she will manage it. Then Hermione took them to Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. Are you sure it's safe here? Chris asked as they entered. Absolutely. This is the safest place. No one will think we are here, Hermione replied happily. Except Percy, Ron added. Why? Chris asked. He saw us last time when we were here and took house points. Ron snorted. Chris sighed. I hope he didn't catch us again, she said. Don't worry, he won't, Hermione said as she conjured a portable waterproof fire and perched an old cauldron on it. Suddenly a shrieking sound came from a stall. What's that? Startled, Chris asked. Myrtle, Ron answered. Myrtle started to cry noisily. You start, Hermione, Chris said and went towards the stall where Myrtle was. Hello, Myrtle, she said with a smile. Myrtle abruptly stopped. You're that nice girl, Myrtle said.
Thanks. I'm Chris.
Yes. Yes. I remember. You see, my memory is very sharp. If I notice something clearly, I never forget it. So I was saying we're working on something here. So, Myrtle said curiously. Nothing. Just don't tell anyone. Please? Chris was going to ask her not to make noise, but she realized it'll not work, so she said something else. Myrtle suddenly giggled, shocking Chris. I'm not so stupid, Chris. When I saw your friends coming here for the second time, I understood you all are up to something. Don't worry. I'm not Peeves, you were nice to me. I'll not tell anyone though, no one listens to me, she said and rose up in the air, turned over and dived headfirst into the toilet, splashing water all over the place and vanishing from sight. Chris raised her eyebrows in amazement, then came back to Ron and Hermione. As Chris and Hermione started to work on the truth serum, they heard a sound of the bathroom door opening. They stopped working and hid the cauldron, then ran inside a stall, holding their breaths. It's me, said a familiar voice. Chris went towards the door and found Harry closing the door behind. It's Harry, Chris said loudly. Ron and Hermione came out and set the cauldron again in the middle of the bathroom. Harry, she said, you gave us such a fright. How's your arm? Fine, he said, and turned to Chris. You all right? Me? Oh, I'm fine. What happened to me? Chris tried to smile. I was awake last night at hospital wing when, Harry said. Chris coughed. Today she told Ron and Hermione about the incident without any fear or shock, but last night she was literally trembling and Harry was awake. That means he heard her. Well, then, I guess you know what happened to Colin? Chris said, making her voice confident. It's okay, Chris. I can't even begin to imagine if anything like that had happened to my friends. He'll be fine. Don't worry, Harry said, resting a hand on Chris's shoulder. I know he'll be. That's why I'll not worry about him, but I'll concentrate on finding that heir. Chris's voice was determined. Yes, and that's why we started the potion. We'll need some ingredients from Professor Snape's private collection, then it'll be ready, Hermione said. Wait, we're gonna break into Snape's private store? Harry asked, surprised. Yeah. We found almost everything in the student's cupboard except 2, answered Hermione. Relax, Harry, it'll be fine. I have got a plan. Well, I never thought I'd see the day when Hermione would be persuading us to break rules, but if she is so confident, then I don't have any problem. The sooner we get a confession out of Malfoy, the better, snarled Ron. Do you know what I think? He was in such a foul temper after the Quidditch match. He took it out on Colin. Ron, we're still not sure. It's him, Chris said calmly. But if it's him, then trust me, I'll beat the hell out of him. I'll make sure the heir walks around with a broken nose. Lots of broken teeth and bones. The calmness on Chris's voice made Ron and Harry shiver. Oh, there's something else, said Harry, changing the topic. Dobby came to visit me in the middle of the night. Chris, Ron and Hermione looked up, amazed. Who's Dobby? Chris asked. Dobby is a house elf. He came to the Dursleys at summer, warned me to not come to school this year. Stole all my letters over the summer, blocked the wall at the King's Cross station, made the bludger mad at me yesterday, came to the hospital wing last night. He knows many things about the chamber. He knew it was going to open this year, that's why he was trying to send me home. He also slipped that the chamber was opened before. He wants me to go home. Chris, Ron and Hermione took the information inside them in a few seconds. The Chamber of Secrets has been opened before, Hermione said. This settles it, said Ron in a triumphant voice. Lucius Malfoy must have opened the chamber when he was at school here, and now he's told dear old Draco how to do it. It's obvious. See, Chris, I was sure. It's him. Wish Dobby told you what kind of monster's in there, though. I want to know how come nobody's noticed it sneaking around the school. Maybe it can make itself invisible, said Hermione, or maybe it can disguise itself, pretend to be a suit of armor or something. I've read about chameleon ghouls. You read too much, Hermione, said Ron. We know this much because Hermione reads, Ron, said Chris. But I was thinking about something else. What? Harry asked. If the chamber had been opened before and Dobby knows about it, it means these attacks also happened before. So how come no one found the culprit? And what happened at that time? Chris said while thinking. Does it matter what happened at that time? Ron said. Of course it matters, Ron. It'll help us to understand everything. We should try to get information about it. Hermione answered. Next morning, Chris woke up hearing a scream. She got up from the bed so fast that her neck made a weird sound. Chris then noticed Ginny was sweating and mumbling. Her eyes were closed. It's like she was fighting with someone or something in her dream. Chris ran towards her and tried to wake her up. After calling her name a few times, shaking her vigorously, she woke up. She got up and started to shiver. Chris patted her back, assured her a few times that everything was fine, and only then she calmed down. Chris understood she was scared because of what happened to Colin. Lauren and Danielle, the other two girls in their room, didn't say anything this time because they were also scared. Colin's incident broke the confidence of first years. They started to walk around in groups, never leaving each other alone. Only two girls in first year didn't walk with the crowd. One was Luna and the other was Chris. Chris told Luna that she was working with Harry, Hermione, and Ron to catch the heir of Slytherin. She omitted two parts, the truth serum and Draco Malfoy. In the first week of December, Hermione stole ingredients from Snape's private store and they completed the potion. It was effectively working on Ron and Harry. Now they just needed to catch Malfoy. On Friday night, Chris and Harry were watching the stars and talking in the common room. For last few weeks, Harry was joining Chris on her late-night stargazing. This time, Harry was telling her about his uncle, aunt, and cousin, the Dursleys. And then this weird thing happened. Aunt Petunia cut my hair, very badly. I didn't like it at all, and the next morning I saw my hair was grown back. She was so furious. I didn't know, that time, why she was so scared. Chris laughed.
Oh.
And another day, I accidentally set a boa constrictor on my cousin Dudley at the zoo. Harry laughed. Though I didn't mean to. You set a snake on your cousin? Why? Chris asked as she stopped laughing. Oh. It was telling me it had never seen Brazil, and I sort of set it free without meaning to. Harry laughed again, but looking at Chris's surprised face, he stopped. Do you know what that means, Harry? Harry didn't know what to say. That means you can understand the snake language. Can you speak it too? Chris asked, getting excited. What? No. I never spoke any different language, and I mean there will be many wizards who can understand snakes. No, Harry, this snake language is very different. It's called parcel tongue. I have been reading about Salazar Slytherin when I found this. It's a very rare gift, and many think that only Salazar Slytherin or their descendants are capable of speaking this. Chris's expression changed suddenly. Harry got scared, realizing what it means. But how can be? I mean, I'm not the heir of Slytherin. Relax, Harry. I'm not saying you're the one who opened the chamber, but I've just realized something. In that case, the actual heir will be a Parselmouth too. Really? Harry asked, surprised. I hope so. Let's see if our Draco can speak parcel tongue. Chris smiled. At least we got a clue for now. Chris, can I tell you something? Harry asked uncertainly. Yeah? Chris raised her eyebrows. You've another clue? No, it's just. Last year the Sorting Hat wanted me to put in Slytherin. Then how did you ended up in Gryffindor? I asked for it. I heard that Slytherin is the house of dark wizards. So when he said I'll be good Slytherin, I refused to be there. Even Ron and Hermione don't know about this. So? You think you're the heir of Slytherin? No. Of course not, but do you think that I'm a dark wizard? Chris chuckled. No, Harry, you're thinking it in a wrong way. Well, here is the thing. When I was getting sorted, the Sorting Hat told me that I'll be good at every house and asked which house do I want to be in. I asked it to decide and it put me in Gryffindor. But the point is, it thought I'll be a good Slytherin too because I'm ambitious, determined, and a born leader. And as much as I know, you also have these qualities. So, yeah, it was right, you could have been a great Slytherin. You don't have to be dark to be in Slytherin, Harry. You really see things in a different way, Harry said. Yes, that I do. Listen, Harry, if you decide to be a good person, then no one can stop you. Just stop thinking that you're bad. Chris said seriously. Harry nodded. In the second week of December, Professor McGonagall came around for collecting names of those who would be staying at school for Christmas. The Weasleys, Harry, and Hermione were staying, so Chris also signed the list and informed her father. Hermione insisted her to stay when she heard that Malfoy was staying. She said the holidays would be the perfect time to get a confession out of him. Chris agreed, but she was more concerned about Ginny. After Colin's incident, Ginny was having nightmares every day. Chris thought, although Ginny was not talking to her, she should not leave Ginny alone. She was trying to keep an eye on Ginny just in case she has another panic attack. After a few days, Chris was returning from her class, walking across the entrance hall when she saw a small knot of people gathered around the notice board, reading a piece of parchment that had just been pinned up. She made her way towards the board when she saw a notice about a dueling club. So they want to prepare everyone, Chris thought as she went back to the dormitory. So at 8 o'clock that evening, she hurried back to the Great Hall with the first years then. She and Luna joined Harry, Ron and Hermione. The long dining tables had vanished and a golden stage had appeared along one wall, lit by thousands of candles floating overhead. The ceiling was velvety black once more, and most of the schools seemed to be packed beneath it, all carrying their wands and looking excited. Chris was excited too. She never participates in a duel. I wonder who'll be teaching us, said Hermione as they edged into the chattering crowd. Someone told me Flitwick was a dueling champion when he was young. Maybe it'll be him. That'll be great. Professor Flitwick is my favorite teacher, said Chris enthusiastically. As long as it's not. Harry began, but he ended on a groan. Gilderoy Lockhart was walking onto the stage, resplendent in robes of deep plum and accompanied by none other than Snape, wearing his usual black. Really? Chris snorted. Luna was watching everything very attentively. Lockhart waved an arm for silence the crowd and called, gather round, gather round. Can everyone see me? Can you all hear me? Excellent. Now Professor Dumbledore has granted me permission to start this little dueling club to train you all in case you ever need to defend yourselves, as I myself have done on countless occasions. For full details, see my published works. Great. Of course we're here to listen to his heroics, Chris said sarcastically. Hermione glared at her and Chris hurriedly looked away. Let me introduce my assistant, Professor Snape, said Lockhart, flashing a wide smile. He tells me he knows a tiny little bit about dueling himself and has sportingly agreed to help me with a short demonstration before we begin. Now, I don't want any of you youngsters to worry. You'll still have your potions master when I'm through with him. Never fear. Wouldn't it be good if they finished each other off? Ron muttered. Chris chuckled. Then she saw Snape's upper lip was curling and Lockhart was giving his signature smile. You know, I have a feeling Lockhart doesn't stand a chance against Snape, Chris muttered. I think so too. Trust me. If Snape had been looking at me like that, I would have been running as fast as I could in the opposite direction, Harry whispered. Chris and Ron both chuckled. Lockhart and Snape turned to face each other and bowed. At least, Lockhart did, with much twirling of his hands, whereas Snape jerked his head irritably. Then they raised their wands like swords in front of them. As you see, we are holding our wands in the accepted combative position, Lockhart told the silent crowd. On the count of 3, we will cast our first spells. Neither of us will be aiming to kill, of course. I wouldn't bet on that, Harry murmured, watching Snape baring his teeth. 1, 2, 3. Both of them swung their wands above their heads and pointed them at their opponent. Snape cried, Expelliarmus. There was a dazzling flash of scarlet light and Lockhart was blasted off his feet. He flew backwards off the stage, smashed into the wall, and slid down it to sprawl on the floor. Malfoy and some of the other Slytherins cheered. Chris clapped and cheered too. Harry and Ron looked at her in surprise. Well, he did that great, didn't he? You have to give him that much credit, Chris said, smiling. Hermione was dancing on tiptoes. Do you think he's all right? She squealed through her fingers. Who cares? Said Chris, Harry, and Ron together. Hermione again glared at them. Lockhart was getting unsteadily to his feet. His hat had fallen off and his wavy hair was standing on end. Well, there you have it, he said, tottering back onto the platform. That was a disarming charm. As you see, I've lost my wand. Ah, thank you, Miss Brown. Yes, an excellent idea to show them that, Professor Snape, but if you don't mind my saying so, it was very obvious what you were about to do. If I had wanted to stop you, it would have been only too easy. However, I felt it would be instructive to let them see. Snape was looking murderous. Chris found the situation very funny when Lockhart noticed Snape's face and said, enough demonstrating. I'm going to come amongst you now and put you all into pairs. Professor Snape, if you'd like to help me. They moved through the crowd, matching up partners. Lockhart teamed Ginny with a Hufflepuff boy and Snape reached Harry and Ron first. Time to split up the dream team, I think, he sneered. Weasley, you can partner Finnegan. Potter, Harry moved automatically toward Hermione. I don't think so, said Snape, smiling coldly. Mr. Malfoy, come over here. Let's see what you make of the famous Potter. And you, Miss Granger, you can partner Miss Bulstrode. And you two can team up. Snape pointed at Luna and Chris. Luna was very happy to hear that. Chris glanced at Ginny, who was facing a Hufflepuff boy. Face your partners, called Lockhart, back on the platform. And bow. Both Luna and Chris bowed gracefully, then hold their wands in front of them. Wands at the ready, shouted Lockhart. When I count to 3, cast your charms to disarm your opponents. Only to disarm them. We don't want any accidents. 1, 2, 3. Expelliarmus, shouted Chris, and Luna's wand went flying from her hand. How did you do that on your first attempt? Luna asked, picking up her wand. Maybe or maybe not. I was practicing. Chris smirked. Luna laughed. You need to teach me that. Cool! They again faced each other, and this time Chris asked Luna to do it. After 3-4 attempts, Luna disarmed Chris, but then Chris noticed a haze of greenish smoke was hovering over the scene. Ginny was standing nervously while the Hufflepuff boy was encouraging her to do the spell. Harry's legs were dancing, Draco was laughing, lying on the floor. Ron was holding up an ashen-faced Finnegan, apologizing for whatever his broken wand had done, but Hermione and Miss Bulstrode was still moving. She had Hermione in a headlock, and Hermione was whimpering in pain. Both their wands lay forgotten on the floor. Chris ran towards them and started pulling the large and heavy Slytherin girl. She was not ready to leave Hermione, but Chris shouted at her to leave. After struggling for a while, Chris pulled her. Lockhart started to take a look at everyone. Harry came to Hermione and Chris. You all right, Hermione? He asked urgently. I think so. Hermione coughed. Chris rubbed her back. I think I'd better teach you how to block unfriendly spells, said Lockhart, standing flustered in the midst of the hole. He glanced at Snape, whose black eyes glinted, and looked quickly away. Let's have a volunteer pair, Longbottom and Finch Fletchley. How about you? A bad idea, Professor Lockhart, said Snape, gliding over like a large and malevolent bat. Longbottom causes devastation with the simplest spells. We'll be sending what's left of Finch Fletchley up to the hospital wing in a matchbox. Neville Longbottom, a Gryffindor boy in Harry's year, went pink hearing this. How about Malfoy and Potter, said Snape with a twisted smile. Excellent idea, said Lockhart, gesturing Harry and Malfoy into the middle of the hall as the crowd backed away to give them room. Harry, I've read about blocking spells. It'll be very difficult to produce, and Malfoy can throw any kind of dangerous spell on you, so before he can do anything, just disarm him. It'll be best, Chris advised. Harry nodded and went towards Lockhart. Now, Harry, said Lockhart, when Draco points his wand at you, you do this. He raised his own wand, attempted a complicated sort of wiggling action, and dropped it. Snape smirked as Lockhart quickly picked it up, saying, Whoops. My wand is a little overexcited. Even Mr. Ollivander will not agree with this. Chris muttered and sighed. Snape moved closer to Malfoy, bent down and whispered something in his ear. Malfoy smirked too. Harry nervously looked at Chris. Chris smiled. 3, 2, 1, go! Lockhart shouted. Harry raised his wand, but Malfoy was fast. He raised his wand quickly and bellowed, Serpensoria. The end of his wand exploded. Harry watched aghast as a long black snake shot out of it, fell heavily onto the floor between them, and raised itself, ready to strike. There were screams as the crowd backed swiftly away, clearing the floor for the snake, which just exploded from Malfoy's wand. Don't move, Potter, said Snape lazily, clearly enjoying the sight of Harry standing motionless, eye to eye with the angry snake. I'll get rid of it. Allow me, shouted Lockhart. He brandished his wand at the snake, and there was a loud bang. The snake, instead of vanishing, flew 10 feet into the air and fell back to the floor with a loud smack. Enraged, hissing furiously, it slithered straight toward Chris and raised itself again, fangs exposed, poised to strike. Chris took out her wand and was about to cast Stupefy.
Harry shouted, Don't move, Chris.
Chris looked at him and he started to make a hissing sound. The snake slumped to the floor, docile as a thick black garden hose, its eyes now on Harry. Harry sighed and looked up at Chris and found her grinning at him. What did you ask it? Chris asked excitedly.
To leave you alone? Harry smiled awkwardly, seeing the other frightening faces.
Amazing, Chris grinned again. Snape stepped forward, waved his wand, and the snake vanished in a small puff of black smoke. Snape, too, was looking at Harry in an unexpected way. It was a shrewd and calculating look. There was muttering all around the walls. Harry started to leave, and Ron and Hermione followed him. As they went through the doors, the people on either side drew away as though they were frightened of catching something. Harry got irritated and hurried to the door. As they left, people started to stare at Chris. Luna Poker, you knew he can talk to snakes?
Yeah.
He told me a few weeks ago, Chris answered. Let's get out of here. She was feeling uncomfortable because of everyone's gaze. Luna nodded and they also left the hall. Chris entered the Gryffindor common room and heard Harry's angry voice. I don't know why you two are making so big deal out of it. I saw the snake was about to attack Chris, so I stopped it. Chris knows I am a Parselmuth. She said it's not a bad thing. Harry, everybody doesn't listen to Chris just because she doesn't think it bad, doesn't mean it's not bad. Hermione said loudly, yeah, And now the whole school's gonna think you're Salazar Slytherin's great-great-great-great-great-great-grandson or something, Ron said. But I'm not, said Harry with an irritated tone. You'll find that hard to prove, said Hermione. He lived about 1,000 years ago. For all we know, you could be. Hearing that Harry stormed off to boys' dormitory, Hermione sighed, then turned around and saw Chris standing there. Without saying anything, Chris silently made her way to girls' dormitory before Hermione could speak. Next morning, Chris heard the other two girls, Danielle and Lauren, speaking that for the second time Ginny had left a mess of rooster feathers on her bed and on the room floor. Chris wouldn't have believed it if she hadn't seen that with her own eyes. "Hi, Chris," Hermione said loudly as soon as Chris entered the common room. "Oh, hey," Chris said, scanning the room for Ginny. Chris, listen, last night I was just worried about Harry. I didn't mean to say anything bad about you," Hermione said breathlessly. "It's okay, Hermione. I understand." Chris gave a little smile. She was really not in the mood of taking small grudges over people. The snow that had begun in the night had turned into a blizzard so thick that the last herbology lessons of the term were cancelled. Professor Sprout wanted to fit socks and scarves on the mandrakes, a tricky operation she would entrust to no one else, now that it was so important for the mandrakes to grow quickly and revive Mrs. Norris and Colin. The first-year Gryffindors didn't have any classes that morning, and second year's herbology was cancelled. Chris saw there was still no sign of Ginny, so she decided to look for her. She asked Ron, Fred, George, and Percy if they had seen Ginny. No one knew where was she. Chris carefully assured the Weasleys that there was nothing to worry about. Then she left the common room and soon Harry came following her. "What are you doing here, Harry?" Chris said as she saw him. "Actually, I wanted to talk," Harry said, awkwardly. "Yes," Chris started walking again. "Ron and Hermione think that I can be the heir of Slytherin. They said being a Parseltongue is a bad gift," Harry said, walking with her.
I know. I heard them last night.
Chris said, still carefully looking at the hallways. "Oh, Chris, I know you don't think it's a bad thing, but Hermione is right. People will doubt me." "People were doubting you before, didn't they?" "People will talk, Harry. You'll see. If they find something new by tomorrow, then they will accuse someone else. So relax," Chris said, as they turned a corner and came face to face with a giant man. Chris looked up and saw Hagrid.
"Oh, hello, Hagrid," Harry said, looking up.
Hagrid's face was entirely hidden by a woolly, snow-covered balaclava, but it couldn't possibly be anyone else, as he filled most of the corridor in his moleskin overcoat. A dead rooster was hanging from one of his massive, gloved hands. "All right, Harry," he said, pulling up the balaclava so he could speak. "Why aren't you in class?" "Cancelled," said Harry. "What are you doing in here?" Hagrid held up the limp rooster. "The second one killed this term," he explained. "It's either foxes or a blood-sucking bugbear, and I need the headmaster's permission to put a charm around the hen coop." "Roosters? Second time?" Chris thought and raised her eyebrows. Hagrid noticed Chris from under his thick, snow-flecked eyebrows. "And who's this?" Hagrid asked. "Oh, this is Chris. We met her in Diagon Alley, Hagrid, remember?" Harry said. "Who? The one ye met while leaving the Nocturne Alley?" Hagrid replied. "Nocturne Alley? What on earth you were doing there?" Chris asked, looking surprised.
I was lost. Hagrid, I told you."
"Course." Hagrid chuckled. "Nice to meet ye, Chris." "Same here, Hagrid." Chris smiled. "Any friend of Harry's are welcome in the Meh house. Come for tea sometimes, if you like," Hagrid said, then winked at Harry. "See you later, Hagrid," Harry said as Hagrid left. Before Chris can ask something, Harry hurriedly spoke. "We should better get going, Chris. It's Transfiguration next, and I've got to pick up my books." "Okay," Chris said, and they started walking towards the Gryffindor Tower. They turned along another corridor, which was particularly dark. Chris had a bad feeling while walking there. The same feeling she had when she was walking with Colin last time. Suddenly, Chris froze. In front of them, Justin Finch Fletchley was lying on the floor, rigid and cold, a look of shock frozen on his face, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling, and that wasn't all. Next to him was another figure. It was nearly headless Nick, no longer pearly white and transparent, but black and smoky, floating immobile and horizontal, 6 inches off the floor. His head was half off and his face wore an expression of shock identical to Justin's. Harry almost behaved like he has been suffocated. Chris looked around the deserted corridor and saw a line of spiders scuttling as fast as they could away from the bodies. The only sounds were the muffled voices of teachers from the classes on either side. Harry started to panic. Chris took some deep breaths. "We should call the teachers," Chris said calmly, but before she can do anything, a door right next to them opened with a bang. Peeves, the poltergeist, came shooting out. "Why, it's Potty Wee Potter," cackled Peeves. knocking Harry's glasses askew as he bounced past him. What's Potter and Norton up to? Why are they lurking? Peeves stopped, halfway in midair. He spotted Justin and nearly headless Nick. He flipped the right way up, filled his lungs and screamed, "Attack! Attack! Another attack! No mortal or ghost is safe! Run for your lives! Attack!" Crashin'! 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 Door after door flew open along the corridor and people flooded out. For several long minutes there was a scene of such confusion that Justin was in danger of being squashed and people kept standing in nearly headless Nick. Professor McGonagall came running and used her wand to set off a loud bang, which restored silence and ordered everyone back into their classes. No sooner had the scene cleared somewhat, a Hufflepuff boy arrived panting on the scene. "Caught in the act!" the boy yelled, his face stark white, pointing his finger dramatically at Harry and Chris. "That will do, Macmillan," said Professor McGonagall sharply. Peeves were bobbing overhead, now grinning wickedly, surveying the scene. Peeves always loved chaos. As the teachers bent over Justin and nearly headless Nick, examining them, Peeves broke into a song about Chris and Harry. "That's enough, Peeves," barked Professor McGonagall, and Peeves zoomed away backwards, with his tongue out at Harry and Chris. Justin was carried up to the hospital wing by Professor Flitwick and Professor Sinistra of the astronomy department, but nobody seemed to know what to do for nearly headless Nick. In the end, Professor McGonagall conjured a large fan out of thin air, which she gave to the same Hufflepuff boy with instructions to waft nearly headless Nick up the stairs. Soon Chris and Harry were left alone with Professor McGonagall. "This way, Potter and Norton," she said. "Professor," said Harry at once. "I swear we didn't." "This is out of my hands, Potter," said Professor McGonagall curtly. "Harry, calm down. We didn't do anything," Chris said as they followed Professor McGonagall. They marched in silence around a corner and she stopped before a large and extremely ugly stone gargoyle. "Lemon drop," she said. This was evidently a password because the gargoyle sprang suddenly to life and hopped aside as the wall behind him split in two. Chris was amazed. Behind the wall was a spiral staircase that was moving smoothly upward, like an escalator. As they and Professor McGonagall stepped onto it, Chris heard the wall thud closed behind them. They rose upward in circles, higher and higher until at last, slightly dizzy, they saw a gleaming oak door ahead, with a brass knocker in the shape of a griffin. This must be Dumbledore's office. They stepped off the stone staircase at the top, and Professor McGonagall rapped on the door. It opened silently and they entered. Professor McGonagall told them to wait, and left them there. The only office Chris had seen before was Lockhart's office, and she was really not interested in watching his various portraits smiling at her. But Dumbledore's office was different. She was curious and everything around her felt like mysteries which were ready to be solved by her. Harry was standing stiffly. Chris started to look around. It was a large and beautiful circular room, full of funny little noises. A number of curious silver instruments stood on spindle-legged tables, whirring and emitting little puffs of smoke. The walls were covered with portraits of old headmasters and headmistresses, all of whom were snoozing gently in their frames. Chris heard a strange, gagging noise behind her. She turned and saw standing on a golden perch behind the door was a decrepit-looking bird that resembled a half-plucked turkey. The bird looked balefully back, making its gagging noise again. "Harry, look!" Chris called Harry to see the bird. It was looking very ill. Its eyes were dull, and even as Harry watched, a couple more feathers fell out of its tail. "Is it all right?" Harry asked fearfully. "No. I think it's time. It's gonna die," Chris said. "What?" Harry was in shock. "Harry, it's a phoenix. When I was reading about wandcores, I read about it. They are very beautiful and rare creatures. Don't worry, they burst into flame when it is time for them to die and are reborn from the ashes. They can carry immensely heavy loads and their tears have healing powers." Chris said, smiling at the bird, "You can move on peacefully. It's painful to see you like this." Harry looked at them flabbergasted. Suddenly the bird burst into flames. It gave one loud shriek and next second there was nothing but a smoldering pile of ash on the floor. Then a tiny wrinkled newborn bird poked its head out of the ashes. Chris smiled at it. "Aren't you the cutest?" she said. Harry chuckled. Chris rolled her eyes at him. "Do you think Dumbledore will expel us?" Harry asked, finally recovering from the shock. "No? Course not. Dumbledore is a wise man. He'll never do anything just because of few rumors." She moved on to see the other things in the office and saw Harry looking at the sorting hat. Harry went towards the hat and picked it. "Harry, you're still hanging on that Slytherin Gryffindor thing, aren't you?" Chris said, raising an eyebrow. Harry was hesitating to hold the hat. Chris frowned and took the hat from him. "Every house is good, Harry." she said loudly and was about to put the hat back when a big and long thing fell from the hat with a loud thud sound. Chris and Harry both looked at it. It was a gleaming silver sword, its handle glittering with rubies the size of eggs. Chris picked it up and examined it closely. A name engraved just below the hilt, Godric Gryffindor. What? Chris asked, looking at the hat. Don't look at me. The sword comes out when it wants to be. I've nothing to do with this, the hat said arrogantly. Great, Chris said sarcastically. The office door opened. Dumbledore came in, looking very somber. Dumbledore looked at Harry, then he saw Chris holding a sword in one hand and the sorting hat in other. Before Chris or Dumbledore could say anything, Harry hurriedly explained. Professor, the sword came out its own, we didn't do anything. Chris sighed and Dumbledore chuckled. I didn't say anything, Harry. I know, for the fact that the sword can only comes out on its own, said Dumbledore calmly, then looked at the hat. But why did it came out this time? I'm repeating, I don't know what the sword want or do, the hat said with irritated voice. It's all right. You can leave the sword and the hat on the desk, Miss Norton. I'll see this later, Dumbledore said. Chris nodded and put the sword and the hat on the desk. Dumbledore settled himself in the high chair behind the desk and fixed Harry and Chris with his penetrating light blue stare. But before Dumbledore could speak another word, however, the door of the office flew open with an almighty bang and Hagrid burst in, a wild look in his eyes, his balaclava perched on top of his shaggy black head, and the dead rooster still swinging from his hand. It wasn't them, Professor Dumbledore, said Hagrid urgently. I was talking to them seconds before that kid was found. They never had time, sir. Dumbledore tried to say something, but Hagrid went ranting on, waving the rooster around in his agitation, sending feathers everywhere. It can't have been them. I'll swear it in front of the Ministry of Magic if I have to. Hagrid, we've got the wrong boy, sir. I know Harry never— Hagrid, said Dumbledore loudly. I do not think that Harry or Miss Norton attacked those people. Oh, said Hagrid, the rooster falling limply at his side. Right. I'll wait outside then, headmaster. And he stomped out looking embarrassed. Well, he's just like you, Chris whispered into Harry's ear. You don't think it was me or Chris, Professor? Harry repeated, ignoring Chris. No, Harry, I don't, said Dumbledore as he brushed rooster feathers off his desk. Chris gave Harry a told-you-so look. But I still wanted to talk to you both, said Dumbledore, though his face was somber again. Harry waited nervously and Chris made a curious face while Dumbledore considered them, the tips of his long fingers together. I must ask you whether there is anything you'd like to tell me, he said gently. Anything at all? There was few moments' silence. No, said Harry. There isn't anything, Professor. Chris looked at Harry, then turned towards Dumbledore. But I want to ask you something, Professor. Yes, Miss Norton? Dumbledore said, carefully looking at her. Professor, what happened when the Chamber of Secrets was opened last time? Chris asked confidently. Harry dropped his jaw in shock and surprise. Dumbledore looked at Chris for a few seconds. Few attacks happened like this, and at last, he sighed. A Muggle-born student was killed. Then, did you found the culprit? Chris asked again. Yes and no, Dumbledore said, and Chris nodded, understanding that Dumbledore wasn't going to answer more than that. Thanks for telling us, Professor, and just Christina is fine. Chris smiled. No problem. As I said before, students have the right to know few things. Dumbledore smiled back. Chris and Harry left the office. As they entered the common room, Chris saw Ginny on the Staris. She followed her. Ginny! Ginny! Wait! Chris called and Ginny stopped. Ginny, where were you? I was looking for you all morning. Ginny looked at Chris like she was petrified. Ginny paused. Leave me alone, Chris. Please. She shouted and ran towards their room. After that day, Ginny started to spend her most of the time with her brothers. She wasn't talking with anyone else. Luna told Chris that everyone's thinking Harry as a dark wizard and the heir of Slytherin who opened the chamber, and Chris as his follower who was attacking the students for him. The double attack on Justin and nearly headless Nick turned what had been nervousness into real panic. Curiously, it was nearly headless Nick's fate that seemed to worry people most. What could possibly do that to a ghost? People asked each other what terrible power could harm someone who was already dead. There was almost a stampede to book seats on the Hogwarts Express so that students could go home for Christmas. At this rate, we'll be the only ones left. Ron told Chris, Harry, and Hermione. Us, Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle. What a jolly holiday it's going to be. Harry was tired of people skirting around him in the corridors, as though he were about to sprout fangs or spit poison, tired of all the muttering, pointing, and hissing as he passed. People were also looking at Chris at the same way, but unlike Harry, she found this very funny. In fact, she joined Fred and George as they went out of their way to march ahead of Harry down the corridors, shouting, "Make way for the heir of Slytherin, seriously evil wizard and his devoted evil follower coming through. Don't stand on the middle of our way," said Chris. Percy was deeply disapproving of this behavior. "It is not a laughing matter," he said coldly. "Oh, get out of the way, Percy," said Fred. "Harry and Chris are in a hurry." "Yeah, they are off to the Chamber of Secrets for a cup of tea with their fanged servant," said George, chortling. Ginny didn't find it amusing either. "Oh, don't," she wailed, every time Fred asked Harry or Chris loudly who they were planning to attack next. Everyone left for Christmas, and Chris, Harry, Hermione, and the Weasleys got the Gryffindor Tower to themselves. As Luna also left for Christmas, Chris was spending most of her time in Gryffindor Common Room. The night before Christmas, Ron, Harry, Hermione, and Chris decided to execute their plan. After dinner, they saw Draco Malfoy leaving alone towards his dormitory, and followed him. As they found themselves in a completely empty passage, Chris called Leon and gave a gift box to him. Leon followed the order. He flew around Draco sometimes so Draco can notice him, then dropped the gift box in his hand and left. Draco smiled as he saw the note on the box. "Dear Draco Malfoy, the Prince of Purebloods. A small gift to make your Christmas special. From a true admirer." Draco grinned broadly and started to open the box. Chris, Hermione, Harry, and Ron watched that while hiding in a corner. "Flattery works every time to this kind of persons," whispered Chris. As soon as Draco opened the box and a green cloud of smokes came out on Draco's face, in few seconds he was on the floor, moaning. "Hermione's paralyzing draught worked," Chris whispered, as Harry and Ron dragged Draco into an empty classroom. "Are you the heir of Slytherin?" Ron said to the tied, almost unconscious Malfoy.
No.
Malfoy replied. "Do you know who is the heir of Slytherin?"
Harry asked.
"No," Malfoy repeated. "Are you Draco Malfoy?" Hermione asked, to cross-check if the truth serum was working or not. "Yes," admitted Malfoy. "Did someone told you about the Chamber of Secrets?" Chris said. "Yes." "Anyone from the school?" "No." "Then your father?" Ron asked. "Yes." "Do your father know who the heir is?" Chris asked. "Yes." "Good." Hermione sighed. "We're going nowhere. He doesn't know anything except the things his father told him." "Wait, didn't you said Harry that Dobby works in a horrible pureblood family?" Chris said to Harry. Harry nodded. Chris turned to Malfoy. "Malfoy, do you have a house elf named Dobby?" "Yes," Malfoy said. Few days later, after the new term started, Chris were in Charms class, where Professor Flitwick was giving examples of jinxed artifacts. Because there is a spell to break locks easily, wizards uses different kind of jinxes to protect their locks, said Professor Flitwick. Jinxing is a different and difficult method of magic, but even the smallest object can be jinxed. Different jinxed objects have different kind of results. Few powerful jinxes can live in objects for hundreds of years. That's why young wizards and witches are asked to not to trust any unknown objects so easily. As Professor Flitwick continued, Chris noticed Ginny, who was sitting 2 seats left to her, was sweating like she was sick. As soon as the class ended, Ginny sprinted out of the class and Chris followed. Something was really wrong with her, Chris thought. She must be sick and she should check on her. But Chris stopped when she saw Ginny running into the passageway where the attack on Mrs. Norris happened. Chris watched from a corner as Ginny entered Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. Chris decided to go in, but before she could, Ginny ran out of the bathroom and disappeared around the corner, without noticing Chris. A loud crying and shrieking sound interrupted the corridor. Myrtle was crying very loudly in her bathroom. Chris rushed inside the bathroom and saw Myrtle was trying open all the taps. "Myrtle, what happened?" Chris shouted over her crying sound. "Who's that?" glugged Myrtle miserably, without stopping. "Come to throw something else at me?" "Myrtle, it's Chris," Chris said. "And stop, you're going to flood the place." Myrtle stopped abruptly but started crying, if possible, louder and harder than ever before. "What happened, Myrtle? What was thrown at you?" Chris said. She didn't ask who threw something at her, because she knew it was Ginny. "Don't ask me," Myrtle shouted. "Here I am, minding my own business, and someone thinks it's funny to throw a book at me." "A book?" Chris repeated, looking surprised. "Yes. I was just sitting in the U-bend thinking about death, and it fell right through the top of my head," said Myrtle miserably. "Chris, you just came, did you see you did that?" No," Chris lied. "I was passing by when I heard you crying." "Oh." Myrtle started to sob. "Sorry, Myrtle, but if you don't mind me asking, where's the book?" Chris said. Then realizing Myrtle was eyeing her suspiciously, she added, "Then maybe I can tell who threw that." "All right, it's there." Myrtle pointed at her gloomy stall. Chris walked over there and saw a small, thin book. It had a shabby black cover and was wet. Chris picked it up off the floor and saw at once that it was a diary, and the faded year on the cover told him it was 50 years old. On the first page, she could just make out the name T. Riddle in smudged ink. "So who threw this at me?" Myrtle called. No idea," Chris said, then peeled the wet pages apart. They were completely blank. There wasn't the faintest trace of writing on any of them. Chris turned to the back cover of the book and saw the printed name of a variety store on Vauxhall Road. Weird. What was Ginny doing with a 50-years-old diary? Also, which was brought from a Muggle store. "Oh, this reminded me the day I died," Myrtle said mournfully, floating towards the sinks. "You see, it happened right in here. I died in this very stall."
Uh-huh.
Chris nodded absent-mindedly. "And how did you die, Myrtle?" Myrtle's whole aspect changed at once. She looked as though she had never been asked such a flattering question. "Oh, it was dreadful," she said with relish. "I'd hidden because Olive Hornby was teasing me about my glasses. The door was locked, and I was crying, and then I heard somebody come in. They said something funny, a different language. I think it must have been. Anyway, what really got me was that it was a boy speaking." Chris was so deep in thought that she forgot. She had transfiguration class. As Myrtle trailed off with her old memories, Chris suddenly noticed her watch. "Oh, this is bad. Sorry, Myrtle. I've a class I need to go," Chris said, running towards the door. "I'll hear the rest any other time." But the sun had now begun to shine weakly on Hogwarts again. Inside the castle, the mood had grown more hopeful. There had been no more attacks since those on Justin and nearly headless Nick, and Madame Pomfrey was pleased to report that the mandrakes were becoming moody and secretive, meaning that they were fast leaving childhood. The moment their acne clears up, they'll be ready for repotting again. Chris heard her telling Filch kindly one afternoon, and after that, it won't be long until we're cutting them up and stewing them. You'll have Mrs. Norris back in no time. Gilderoy Lockhart seemed to think he himself had made the attacks stop. "I don't think there'll be any more trouble, Minerva," he said, tapping his nose knowingly and winking. "I think the chamber has been locked for good this time. The culprit must have known it was only a matter of time before I caught him. Rather sensible to stop now before I came down hard on him. You know what the school needs now is a morale booster. Wash away the memories of last term. I won't say any more just now, but I think I know just the thing." He tapped his nose again and strode off. Lockhart's idea of a morale booster became clear at breakfast time on February 14th. On February 14th, as Chris entered the Great Hall with Ron and Hermione, she got a huge shock. The walls were all covered with large, lurid pink flowers. Worse still, heart-shaped confetti was falling from the pale blue ceiling. "Bloody hell," Ron looked sick as he said. "What's this? Oh my." Hermione giggled, looking at the staff table. Lockhart, wearing lurid pink robes to match the decorations, was waving for silence. The teachers on either side of him were looking stony-faced. Chris could see a muscle going in Professor McGonagall's cheek. Snape looked as though someone had just fed him a large beaker of a disgusting potion. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Hermione asked happily as they sat on the Gryffindor table.
Hermione, I don't like pink that much.
So, Chris replied, but then stopped as Luna and Ginny came to them. "It's a little bit stupid, isn't it?" Luna asked, looking at the decorations. "I think it's charming," Hermione snapped. Luna ignored her and turned to Chris. "I asked Ginny to join us. I wanted my two friends back together," Luna said. Chris and Ginny caught each other's eye, but Ginny looked away quickly. "What's going on?" Harry asked them, sitting down and wiping confetti off his bacon. "Happy Valentine's Day," Lockhart shouted. "And may I thank the 46 people who have so far sent me cards. Yes, I have taken the liberty of arranging this little surprise for you all, and it doesn't end here." Lockhart clapped his hands, and through the doors to the entrance hall marched a dozen surly-looking dwarfs. Not just any dwarfs, however. Lockhart had them all wearing golden wings and carrying harps. "My friendly card-carrying cupids," beamed Lockhart. "They will be roving around the school today delivering your valentines, and the fun doesn't stop here. I'm sure my colleagues will want to enter into the spirit of the occasion. Why not ask Professor Snape to show you how to whip up a love potion? And while you're at it, Professor Flitwick knows more about entrancing enchantments than any wizard I've ever met. The sly old dog." Professor Flitwick buried his face in his hands. Snape was looking as though the first person to ask him for a love potion would be force-fed poison. Chris and Harry burst out laughing. "That was something," Harry said. "Something hilarious." Chris completed. They started laughing again. All day long, the dwarfs kept barging into their classes to deliver valentines, to the annoyance of the teachers, and late that afternoon, as the Gryffindors were walking upstairs after class, one of the dwarfs caught up with Harry. "Oi, you! Harry Potter!" shouted a particularly grim-looking dwarf, elbowing people out of the way to get to Harry. All the first-year girls, including Ginny, had sent Harry Valentine, of course, except Chris. Harry tried to escape, but the dwarf caught up with him. Chris saw all the first-year girls were looking red. Especially Ginny. "I've got a musical message to deliver to Harry Potter in person," the dwarf said, twanging his harp in a threatening sort of way. "Not here," Harry hissed, trying to escape. "Stay still," grunted the dwarf, grabbing hold of Harry. Harry tried to break free, but Chris held him back. "Oh, let's get over with it. How bad possibly it could be," she said. "Right," the dwarf said, sitting on Harry's ankles. "Here is your singing Valentine. His eyes are as green as a fresh pickled toad. His hair is as dark as a blackboard. I wish he was mine, he's really divine. The hero who conquered the Dark Lord." Chris choked as she started to laugh. "I take that back. This is—" Harry shrugged. "What's going on here?" came the cold, drawling voice of Draco Malfoy. "What's all this commotion?" said another familiar voice as Percy Weasley arrived. But then, another dwarf emerged from the crowd. "Hey, Christina Norton. We've 8 singing valentines for you." Chris abruptly stopped laughing as her eyes went wide. "Ah, I think you've a mistake," she said hurriedly, while trying to walk out of the crowd. "Of course not. Here's the names." And the dwarf started to recite the names of 6 first-year boys and 2 second-year boys who decided to write valentines for Chris. Chris tried to evaporate on the spot. "I'm not that Christina," Chris protested. Ginny ran into class angrily without waiting any farther, and the dwarf started to sing, "Her smile makes everything bright. Her eyes are like the ocean in daylight. She's funny. I have class." Chris ran towards the class before the dwarf can finish the song. She heard Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle howling with laughter as the dwarf continued the song and Percy yelling, off you go, the bell rang 5 minutes ago, off to class now," he said, shooing the students away. Chris tried to forget that entire Valentine's Day, but couldn't as Fred and George kept singing the songs for Harry and Chris to remind it. So far, Chris haven't got a clue about the diary. She used many advanced spells, anything she could find. Chris even tried Hermione's revealer, which she brought from Diagon Alley, but nothing helped. The diary was still blank. It was now nearly 4 months since Justin and nearly headless Nick had been petrified, and nearly everybody seemed to think that the attacker, whoever it was, had retired for good. In March, several of the mandrakes threw a loud and raucous party in Greenhouse 3. This made Professor Sprout very happy. "The moment they start trying to move into each other's pots, we'll know they're fully mature," Hermione told Chris. "Then we'll be able to revive those poor people in the hospital wing." This made Ginny really happy. Everyone thought that's because Colin was her friend, but Chris knew something was wrong. Something was going on in Ginny's head, what the others couldn't see. The Gryffindors were all excited about the upcoming Quidditch match. It was going to happen the first Saturday after the Easter holidays. That Friday, as Chris made her way towards the Great Hall after a potion class, she remembered that she had left her one book at Transfiguration class. So she ran back to collect it, when she heard Professor McGonagall and Flitwick talking. "Lockhart aside, I'm really glad that the attacks stopped," said Professor McGonagall. "I agree, but do you really think, Minerva, that the attacker will stop here?" Professor Flitwick said. "I mean, the air is still not caught." "I also fear about that." Professor McGonagall sighed. "But if another attack happens, then Hagrid will be in trouble." "Dumbledore did save him last time, didn't he?" "Oh yes, he did, 50 years ago. I was studying for my NEDOTs at that time when Hagrid was expelled. He did hide some dangerous creatures though. Minerva, you've to agree he was really a suspicious one in school." "Of course he was. His love for dangerous creatures is still there, but I know him, Flitwick. He'll never try to harm anyone," Professor McGonagall said confidently. Chris ducked out of the room before she could be caught eavesdropping, but now she had a clue: Hagrid. Knowing Harry will not believe Chris about his big best friend Hagrid getting expelled because of being the heir of Slytherin, Chris decided to check on Hagrid on her own. The same Friday afternoon, she set off to meet Hagrid, who lived in a small wooden house on the edge of the Forbidden Forest. A crossbow and a pair of galoshes were outside the front door. When Chris knocked, she heard a frantic scrabbling from inside and several booming barks. Then Hagrid's voice rang out saying, "Back, Fang, back. Who's there?" "It's Chris, Hagrid, Harry's friend." Chris. There was few moments of silence. Then Hagrid's big hairy face appeared in the crack as he pulled the door open. "Chris, what are you doing here?" Hagrid looked around for any sign of Harry. Alone? Hagrid, I wanted to talk to you about something, Chris said politely. Also, you asked me to come for tea, didn't you? Said any friend of Harry can visit you? Oh, right. Come on in. Hang on, Hagrid said. Back, Fang. He let her in, struggling to keep a hold on the collar of an enormous black boarhound. There was only one room inside. Hams and pheasants were hanging from the ceiling. A copper kettle was boiling on the open fire, and in the corner stood a massive bed with a patchwork quilt over it. Tea? Hagrid said, letting go of Fang, who bounded straight at Chris and started licking her ears. Like Hagrid, Fang was clearly not as fierce as he looked. No thanks. Chris said, scratching Fang's head affectionately. So his name is Fang? Yes. Hagrid replied. Cake? Hagrid was clearly confused and uncomfortable. Chris understood this and took the cakes Hagrid was offering. The rock cakes were shapeless lumps with raisins that almost broke her teeth. Hagrid, I know, it's weird, but trust me, if it wasn't important, I wouldn't have bothered you, Chris said earnestly. Fang was still drooling all over her robes. Hagrid nodded. You know about the attacks going on in the castle, right? As Chris said this, Hagrid went stiff. Chris continued. Look, one of my friends have been attacked. But I thought the attacks stopped, Hagrid said, looking concerned. No, I mean the first attack. Colin Creevy. He was my friend. Chris sighed, then looked up at Hagrid. I know he'll be all right. But there are many people in Hogwarts who are Muggle-borns. Hagrid, I'm a Muggle-born. I want this thing to stop. I want to catch that person who's responsible for this. And that's why I need your help. Me? Hagrid choked in her tea. But what me? Hagrid, I know you were accused for the attacks last time. Hagrid flinched, but Chris went on. I heard Professor McGonagall talking. She believes you were innocent. Dumbledore believes you're innocent, and the way Harry talks about you, I want to believe that too. But for that, please tell me, Hagrid, what happened last time? Why did they expel you? Please, Hagrid. Chris took a deep breath after she finished. Hagrid was staring at his jug-sized teacup. There was almost 5 minutes of silence. Hagrid? Chris called. I really don't want to talk about it. Hagrid said, still staring at the cup. I didn't even tell this to Harry. I'm sorry, Hagrid. I didn't mean to blame you or hurt you. I was in 3rd year when this happened. I was caught raising some wolves' cub under my beds. Hagrid began. Their mother wasn't taking care of them. They were motherless. I couldn't see that, so I took them in, but I was caught. Then I met Aragog. Aragog? He's a spider. Acromantula. I got him from a traveler. I hid him inside the castle, and they thought he attacked those people. He killed the girl. Hagrid choked. He was crying. But I knew he wasn't. He can't. I never set him free around the castle. But then they all believed that Riddle, that Slytherin prefect, the perfect student, and I was a boy who loved dangerous creatures. I told him, it's not Aragog. He even saw Aragog. But they never believed me, and Headmaster Dippet expelled me. Only Dumbledore, only he believed me. He knew I was innocent. He saved me, gave me this job. Great man. Dumbledore. Great man. He looked out of the window, still eyes full of tears. Did you say Riddle, Hagrid? Chris asked softly. Yeah, Tom Riddle. Hagrid suddenly looking very fierce. Brilliant boy, they called him. Brilliant. Thanks for the cakes, Hagrid, Chris said. I should get going, it's getting dark. Also, I'll not tell Harry about this. It's your place. No, you tell him. He should know. Hagrid said, looking still distracted. He should know. He's just like me. We both feel outsider. Both accused for a thing we didn't do. Tell him. All right, Chris opened the door. Bye, Hagrid. She closed the door behind her and walked straight to the Gryffindor tower. The situation wasn't simple, as it looked like. This Riddle was suspicious. It couldn't be a coincidence that he happened to buy a diary the same year he turned in Hagrid. He also sounds smart, which means he wouldn't have confused Acromantula as a creature who can petrify. And his 50-year-old diary doesn't solve anything. It has something to do with this mess. Chris sat on the table in the Gryffindor common room, opening the 50-year-old diary in front of her. It was very late, so the room was completely empty. She flicked through the blank pages, not one of which had a trace of scarlet ink on it. Chris pulled a bottle of ink and her quill out, thinking what should she do next. Suddenly, she heard footsteps coming downstairs. She dipped her quill into the ink and hold it above the blank diary page so that it looks like she was writing. Hey. Chris turned to see. It was Harry. Hi. Chris smiled. I thought you stopped coming to the common room. You didn't come last 2 Fridays, did you? Harry said, sitting on a chair. A drop of ink fell on the diary page. Chris saw the ink shone brightly on the paper for a second, and then, as though it was being sucked into the page, vanished. Oh. Chris snapped the diary shut before Harry can notice that. I was a little busy last 2 Fridays. How are you feeling about tomorrow's Quidditch match? It's great, actually. Gryffindor's chances for the Quidditch Cup had never been better. Harry grinned. Even Wood feels the same. Great. All the best to you then. Chris said, still watching the diary from the corner of her eye. Right, thanks. Chris, are you okay? Yeah, why? Chris looked at Harry.
Nothing.
Harry shrugged. Well, is that your diary?
Yeah, yup.
Chris looked at the diary. Why? No, I just thought, it's weird, but, like, I know this diary, somehow it's connected to me. Harry said this, staring at the diary. You know this diary? No, not like that. I never saw it before, but Chris realized he was distracted. Harry, she called. Huh? Harry looked up. Sorry, what were you saying? I was saying it's late. You've a match tomorrow, you need rest, Chris replied. Oh, right. Okay. Harry got up. Good night. Good night.
What is up this diary? How is this possible that Harry feels connected with it? Chris mumbled after Harry left.
Chris loaded up her quill a second time and wrote, Who are you? The words shone momentarily on the page and they too sank without trace. Then, at last, something happened. Oozing back out of the page, in his very own ink, came words Chris had never written. My name is Tom Riddle. How did you come by my diary?
What the...
Chris really wasn't expecting a reply, but she gathered herself and wrote again.
Hello, Tom.
Actually, someone tried to flush it down a toilet. Chris waited eagerly for Riddle's reply. Lucky that I recorded my memories in some more lasting way than ink, but I always knew that there would be those who would not want this diary read. Of course, if you frame innocent people, who will try to read your diary? Chris snorted but hurriedly wrote back, What do you mean? I mean that this diary holds memories of terrible things. Things that were covered up. Things that happened at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Riddle replied. Chris thought talking to a diary wasn't safe, especially after hearing Professor Flitwick's class, but she needed answers. She wrote again and tried to look like a naive girl. Yes, I'm here now. In Hogwarts, terrible things are happening to Muggleborns. I'm a Muggleborn too. I'm scared. Everyone thinks it's Harry Potter behind this attacks. Do you know who's behind those attacks? Riddle's reply came quickly, his writing becoming untidier, as though he was hurrying to tell all he knew. In my 5th year, I caught the person who'd opened the chamber and he was expelled. But the headmaster, Professor Dippet, ashamed that such a thing had happened at Hogwarts, forbade me to tell the truth. A story was given out that the girl had died in a freak accident. They gave me a nice, shiny, engraved trophy for my trouble and warned me to keep my mouth shut. But I knew it could happen again. The monster lived on, and the one who had the power to release it was not imprisoned. Hagrid. Chris smiled. Then wrote back.
So you don't think it's Harry Potter? He's innocent?
Wait, do you know who's Harry Potter? Riddle was writing very fast now. Yes, of course I know. A girl who wrote before you told me all about the famous Harry Potter, the boy who conquered the Dark Lord. Conquered the Dark Lord, it's Ginny. Chris realized what was going on.
Nice talking to you, Tom.
Chris wrote, You never told me, what's your name? Riddle wrote back. But this time slowly. Christina Norton. Chris wrote that, shut the diary closed, then hid it inside the cabinet beside her bed. Next morning, Chris got up and saw the room was empty. She called Leon, pulled a parchment, and wrote something on it. Then tied it to Leon's leg. Deliver it to Hagrid, will you? She asked. Leon hooted happily and took off. Chris checked the cabinet and saw the diary was still there, then left to take shower. After getting ready, Chris went for breakfast, but it was already late. The match was going to start any minute now, so Chris just wrapped few toasts and beacons in a napkin and set off towards the field. On the way, she saw Hermione running in opposite direction. Hermione, where are you? Chris began, but Hermione cut her off. Not now, Chris. I'm going to the library, Hermione said breathlessly without stopping. Chris decided to tell her everything about the diary after she comes back from the library. Soon Chris joined Ron in the stands. Luna made her way towards Chris. I hope Gryffindors wins today, Ron said. The atmosphere is really gloomy. The teams walked onto the field to tumultuous applause. Oliver Wood took off for a warm-up flight around the goalposts. Madam Hooch released the balls. The Hufflepuffs, who played in Canary Yellow, were standing in a huddle, having a last-minute discussion of tactics. Isn't Professor McGonagall? Luna pointed a half-marching, half-running across the pitch. Professor McGonagall, carrying an enormous purple megaphone. What's going on? Chris looked surprised. This match has been cancelled, Professor McGonagall called through the megaphone addressing the packed stadium. There were boos and shouts. All students are to make their way back to the house common rooms, where their heads of houses will give them further information. As quickly as you can, please. Something is wrong, we should check, Ron said, running towards Harry on the field. Chris and Luna looked at each other and followed. Do you think it's Creole flowers? Luna said. They make the grounds. Not now, Luna, Chris replied hurriedly. She always hears about Luna's creative things, but not now. As Professor McGonagall hurried out the field with Harry, she glanced at Ron, Chris, and Luna. Yeah, perhaps you all can come, she said. Some of the students swarming around them were grumbling about the match being cancelled. Others looked worried. Chris, Luna, Harry, and Ron followed Professor McGonagall back into the school and up the marble staircase, but they weren't taken to anybody's office this time. This will be a bit of a shock, said Professor McGonagall in a surprisingly gentle voice as they approached the infirmary. There has been another attack, another double attack. Chris's heart sank. This is terrible. Professor McGonagall pushed the door open and they all entered after her. Madame Pomfrey was bending over a sixth-year girl with long, curly hair. Chris recognized her as the Ravenclaw prefect she had met before, and on the bed next to her was Hermione. Harry and Ron ran towards her. Hermione lay utterly still, her eyes open and glassy. They were found near the library, said Professor McGonagall. I don't suppose either of you can explain this? It was on the floor next to them. She was holding up a small, circular mirror. Chris felt something around her wasn't making sense anymore. The diary was in her room then. How did this thing happen? Chris ran towards the Gryffindor tower without thinking. Professor McGonagall and Luna called after her, but she didn't stop. She hurried through the crowded common room and finally stopped in front of her room. She took a deep breath and opened the cabinet. The diary wasn't there. Damn it, Ginny. Just then Leon came in with a note. Chris took the note and read, all right. Collected from my house tomorrow morning. She ran back to the common room and saw Ginny was standing next to Percy. But before she can reach her, Professor McGonagall came in with Harry and Ron, both looking devastated. Professor McGonagall gave a pointed look towards Chris and started reading a parchment. All students will return to their house common rooms by 6 o'clock in the evening. No student is to leave the dormitories after that time. You will be escorted to each lesson by a teacher. No student is to use the bathroom unaccompanied by a teacher. All further Quidditch training and matches are to be postponed. There will be no more evening activities. She rolled up the parchment and said in a somewhat choked voice, I need hardly add that I have rarely been so distressed. It is likely that the school will be closed unless the culprit behind these attacks is caught. I would urge anyone who thinks they might know anything about them to come forward. Chris almost screamed, but then she thought, first, it's important to talk to Ginny. Professor McGonagall climbed somewhat awkwardly out of the portrait hole, and the Gryffindors began talking immediately. That's 2 Gryffindors down, not counting a Gryffindor ghost, 1 Ravenclaw and 1 Hufflepuff, said the Weasley twins' friend Lee Jordan, counting on his fingers. Haven't any of the teachers noticed that the Slytherins are all safe? Isn't it obvious all this stuff's coming from Slytherin? The heir of Slytherin, the monster of Slytherin, why don't they just chuck all the Slytherins out? He roared. To nods and scattered applause. Chris made her way towards Ginny and grabbed her hand. Ginny, we need to talk. A shocked Ginny looked at her. Right. Now, Chris said before she can open her mouth. Chris dragged Ginny to their room and closed the door. Chris, what are you? Ginny panicked. Where's the diary, Ginny? Chris asked, looking straight into her eyes. Ginny almost choked. I know you had the diary, Ginny. Now give it to me. I have to give it to Professor Dumbledore. Chris said in one breath. I don't know what are you talking about, Ginny said with a one-steady voice. Chris pulled out a picture from her desk, then grabbed a notebook from Ginny's desk and held it in front of Ginny.
Now, do you know?
It was the picture Colin took of that wall where Mrs. Norris was attacked. The handwriting in Ginny's notebook was same with the writing on the wall. No, please. The diary and me has nothing to do with the attacks, Ginny said, getting pale. You know, Ginny, that's not true. Same handwriting. Rooster's feathers. Paint on your robes. Not to mention, no one saw you during all the attacks, Chris said, calming her voice a little. Ginny was about to cry. Please, please, Chris. They will expel me. I did. Ginny, calm down and think. The dairy is making you do horrible things. Don't you understand? Chris's voice was perfectly calm now. But no one knows it's me. Please don't tell them. If you don't, then they'll never know, Ginny said stubbornly. Do you think, Ginny, that the teachers can't put 2 and 2 together? Chris said. If yes, then tell me, where were you this morning before the Quidditch match when Hermione was attacked? Ginny looked down. I don't know. I can't remember, she mumbled. Chris sighed. Now, will you give me the diary? Chris said patiently. I will, but Ginny hesitated. Have you wrote in this diary?
Yes.
You did? Ginny looked too much shocked. Yes, Ginny. Now just give me the diary. I'll give it Dumbledore. Hogwarts won't be closed. Ginny looked at Chris for a few moments, then said, okay. Tomorrow morning, I'll go with you and tell Professor Dumbledore everything, but you'll not tell anyone else. Why tomorrow? Please. Hermione was just attacked. Please. Ginny was crying. All right then, just give me the diary. We'll go tomorrow. I'll do it. I promise, but you'll not write in it, will you? Ginny shook her head, still crying. We'll do this first thing in the morning, Chris said, a little reluctantly. Got it? Ginny nodded while sobbing. That night was sleepless. Chris didn't sleep and decided to talk to Harry and Ron. She couldn't hide everything from them anymore. It was almost past midnight. Ginny was sleeping on her bed. Chris sneaked into Ron and Harry's room. Harry wasn't in very deep sleep, so it was easy to wake him up. Harry, it's me, Chris. Wake Ron up and come to the common room. I need to tell you both something. Please. Fast. It's important, she whispered. Okay. Harry replied and Chris left their room. After a few minutes, Ron and Harry came downstairs. Chris? You wanted to tell us something? Ron asked, looking very surprised. Yes, did you know something? Harry said. Yeah. I know what's inside the chamber and who opened the chamber, Chris said quietly. What? Ron almost screamed. Yes. Please. Don't freak out. It's a basilisk, the king of serpents, gigantic-sized snake, and can live many hundreds of years. That's why you inherit Harry, because you're a parcel tongue and it can live without food for many years. Spiders fear it. That's why we saw the spiders running from the places where people were petrified. And remember, Hagrid told us that someone was killing his roosters. Crowing of roosters are fatal to basilisk. Chris looked at the shocked face of Harry and Ron. If someone looked at its eyes through something, then they got petrified. Looking directly to the basilisk's eyes results instant death, but no one died because no one looked it straight in the eye. Colin saw it through his camera. The basilisk burned up all the film inside it, but Colin just got petrified. Justin must have seen the basilisk through nearly headless Nick. Nick got the full blast of it, but he couldn't die again, and Hermione and that Ravenclaw prefect were found with a mirror next to them. Harry said with a realization. And I think Hermione had just realized the monster was a basilisk, and maybe she warned the first person she met to look around corners with a mirror first. And that girl pulled out her mirror. Chris sighed. Ron's jaw dropped. And Mrs. Norris? He whispered eagerly. Remember, there was water under Mrs. Norris, Chris explained. But how? If the snake was gigantic in size, then how come no one saw it? Ron asked. Because it was traveling through the pipes. Remember, Harry heard the sound from the walls. He said it was going up, because it was using the plumbing, then the entrance to the Chamber of Secrets. Harry said hoarsely, what if it's a bathroom? Wait, Myrtle's bathroom, said Chris, surprised. I didn't realize that. She told me once that she died in that bathroom when she heard some funny language. Funny language? Ron looked confused. Parcel tongue. Harry and Chris said together, but you said, who's that heir of Slytherin? So, who is it? Ron asked and Chris took a deep breath. It's Ginny, as Chris said. Ron almost stumbled back in shock. What? Chris, what are you saying? Harry said in disbelief. Ginny can't be. Ron gasped.
How and why I'll tell you both tomorrow. Just know it's not her fault. I convinced Ginny. We're gonna meet Dumbledore tomorrow. And Ron, please don't write to your mother right now. Do it tomorrow. Please.
However, next morning, Professor Dumbledore was gone. So was Hagrid, and Ginny, she was nowhere to be found. Chris, Harry, and Ron searched the entire Gryffindor Tower, the Great Hall. At last, they decided to tell a teacher. What are you three doing here? Professor McGonagall asked with a fearful tone. She was almost white. Professor, Ginny, we're looking for her, Ron said. She's not in Gryffindor Tower from this morning, Professor, Chris said. Professor McGonagall's face became more pale. I suggest you three to go back to the Gryffindor Tower. Something terrible happened. Professor. Chris was tensed. Mr. Weasley, your sister has been taken to the chamber by the monster. We'll try our best to save her. Professor McGonagall said with a cracked voice. Ron slid down onto the floor. Harry helped him to stand up. After Professor McGonagall almost dragged him into the dormitory and told the Gryffindors what had happened to Ginny, Chris, Harry, Ron, Fred, and George was sitting together in a corner of the Gryffindor common room, unable to say anything to each other. Percy wasn't there. He had gone to send an owl to Mr. and Mrs. Weasley, then shut himself up in his dormitory. Chris's face was expressionless. It was like the emotions inside her were so many and so much that her face was failing to express them. Now, will you tell us the entire thing, Chris? Ron spoke for the first time after he heard the news. Chris sighed, then took a deep breath and straightened up in her chair.
Yes. Ow.
It was a diary, the diary of a boy named Tom Riddle. He was the one who accused Hagrid for opening the chamber and freeing the monster within, but Hagrid had a acromantula, a giant spider. Acromantula can't petrify. I realized something was wrong when I found Ginny throwing a diary in Myrtle's bathroom, the diary of that same boy T.M. Riddle. I picked it up and started examining it. Then Harry said he felt connected to the diary, and when I wrote in that diary, it replied back. Tom Riddle was a memory inside the diary. I don't know how long, but Ginny was writing in it, and that's why she wasn't looked like herself. I don't know about all kind of magic, but I know, for that kind of magic, storing a part of yourself, or your life, in a object, needs very, very, very advanced magic, and I won't believe that kind of smart person will mistook between acromantula and basilisk. Then I remembered he was a Slytherin. Everything became clear, Harry's connection to the snakes, and that diary wasn't a coincidence. Tom Riddle turned Hagrid in because he was saving himself. He was the one who opened the chamber last time, and this time using Ginny. He was a Parseltongue too. The paint on Ginny's robes, Rooster's feathers in our room, and on her things, and the writing on the wall matching Ginny's handwriting was enough proofs for me. As she finished, she saw Fred, George, Ron, and Harry were staring at her. This much was happening to our sister and we didn't know, Fred said first. I can't believe it, Ron replied. Now, you four know everything. So if I don't come back, then tell this to Professor Dumbledore. Chris said, getting up. You don't come back? Meaning? Harry asked, also getting up from his seat. Meaning, I'm gonna try to save Ginny. I'll never forgive myself if after knowing this much, I failed to save her. And my father always said, I'm here in this world to do big things, so fighting a basilisk counts, right? She tried to give a fake smile. I'll save your sister or we'll die trying. Please just pray that we don't have to die today. Harry, you just have to open the chamber for me. I'm not able to do that. Harry frowned. You can't go alone inside. I agree, Ron said. So what do you want? To take everyone? You know, right? That only one glance at its eyes and that's it. You'll be dead. Chris said, fuming. Yes. I know, that's why I'll come. Please, Chris. Harry said. Alto, Ron said. And what about us? Fred and George said together, getting on their feet. Great, Chris said sarcastically. Listen, I'll just take Harry because without his Parseltongue ability, it'll be impossible to go inside, but I can't let you all go there. Ron, you can only wait outside the chamber in case we need help from outside. You can call the teachers. Fred and George, please stay here. It'll be risky to take you all there without getting noticed. It took several more minutes to convince Fred and George. At last, they agreed to stay near the Gryffindor Tower. Now, please tell me, Harry, you've something which can take us to Hagrid's hut without being noticed, Chris whispered to Harry.
Actually, I've an invisibility cloak. Harry smiled.
Chris never saw the corridors this crowded before in Hogwarts. Harry and Ron were under Harry's invisibility cloak. Teachers, prefects, and ghosts were marching the corridors in pairs, staring around for any unusual activity. Their invisibility cloak didn't stop them making any noise, and there was a particularly tense moment when Ron stubbed his toe only yards from the spot where Snape stood standing guard. Thankfully, Snape sneezed at almost exactly the moment Ron swore. It was with relief that they reached the oak front doors and eased them open. Outside the day was bright. It was almost noon. They reached Hagrid's house, sad and sorry-looking with its blank windows. When Harry pushed the door open, Fang went mad with joy at the sight of them. Chris holed Fang and patted him. It's all right, Fang. Don't worry. Hagrid will be here in no time. I promise, she said, then went towards a corner of the room. She picked up a box and opened it, then locked it, put a silencing charm on it, and put it in her bag. Your bag is so small then? How? The box is so big, Harry asked, looking surprised. Oh, it's Luna's bag. She gave it to me few days ago. It has an extension charm on it, Chris replied. Suddenly, Leon flew into the hut. Leon dropped a package on Chris's hand. She opened it and saw a beautiful dagger with a long chain attached to its hilt. There was also a note, "There's a very thin line between being stupid and being brave. You've already blurred the line in your life. Anyway, this is the enchanted dagger. Keep the aim clear in your head and throw it in any direction. It'll hit the aim perfectly. Good luck." Chris pulled the dagger out. "Who sent you this?" Harry said.
I don't know. There is no name on the note.
Chris said and looked around the hut. Then she closed her eyes and imagined a Connor in Hagrid's room in her mind. Then throw the dagger in opposite direction. When she opened her eyes, Harry and Ron were watching her in amazement. She turned around and saw the dagger had hit the aim she imagined. Chris smirked and put the dagger in her bag. "Let's go." As they entered the passage where Mrs. Norris was attacked, Ron stopped in front of the writing on the wall. There was another massage written under the first one. They hurried before Filch can come near them. They entered moaning Myrtle's out-of-order bathroom. Myrtle was sitting on the tank of the end toilet. "Oh, it's you, Chris," she said when she saw Chris. "No, last time when I was here, you were telling me how you died in this bathroom, right?" Chris said. Myrtle became happy. "So you came to hear the story of my death?" Chris nodded. "So, as I was saying, Olive Hornby teased me about my glasses, so I came here to hide in that stall. The door was locked, and I was crying, and then I heard somebody come in. I heard a boy speaking, so I unlocked the door to tell him to go and use his own toilet, and then," Myrtle swelled importantly, her face shining, "I died." "How?" said Harry. "No idea," said Myrtle in hushed tones. "I just remember seeing a pair of great big yellow eyes. My whole body sort of seized up, and then I was floating away." She looked at the three dreamily. "And then I came back again. I was determined to haunt Olive Hornby, you see." Oh, she was sorry she'd ever laughed at my glasses. "Where exactly did you see the eyes?" said Chris. "Somewhere there," said Myrtle, pointing vaguely toward the sink in front of her toilet. Chris, Harry and Ron hurried over to it. It looked like an ordinary sink. They examined every inch of it, inside and out, including the pipes below. And then Chris saw it. Scratched on the side of one of the copper taps was a tiny snake. "That tap's never worked," said Myrtle brightly as she tried to turn it. "Harry," said Chris, "say something. Something in parcel tongue." But Harry thought hard. "I can only speak parcel tongue in front of a actual snake." "Then imagine it's an actual snake. Imagine it's moving," Chris said. "Open up," Harry said. He looked at Chris, who shook her head. "English," she said. "Think harder." Harry concentrate again. Then a strange hissing escaped from his mouth, and at once the tap glowed with a brilliant white light and began to spin. Next second, the sink began to move. The sink, in fact, sank right out of sight, leaving a large pipe exposed, a pipe wide enough for a man to slide into. Ron gasped. "Ron, stay here." "I'm going." "You coming, Harry?" Chris said. "Yes, let's go." Harry nodded, but Ron tried to protest. "Wait here," Harry gave Ron's shoulder a squeeze. "Wait here? We'll go on. If we're not back in an hour." There was a pause. "Then inform the teachers," said Chris, and both boys looked at her. "Yeah, if we're not back in an hour, then call the professors." Ron nodded. "I'll go first," Harry said, and he lowered himself slowly into the pipe, then let go. Chris quickly followed and direct jumped into the pipe. It was like rushing down an endless, slimy, dark slide. She could see more pipes branching off in all directions, but none as large as theirs, which twisted and turned, sloping steeply downward, and he knew that she was falling deeper below the school than even the dungeons. And then, just as she had begun to worry about what would happen when she hit the ground, the pipe leveled out, and she shot out of the end with a wet thud, landing on the damp floor of a dark stone tunnel large enough to stand in. Harry was getting to his feet a little ways away, covered in slime. "We must be miles under the school," said Harry, his voice echoing in the black tunnel. "We're under the lake," said Chris, squinting around at the dark, slimy walls. There was darkness ahead. Chris pulled out her wand and whispered, "Lumos," and to her wand lit up. Harry did the same. As they started to walk, their footsteps was slapping loudly on the wet floor. The tunnel was so dark that they could only see a little distance ahead. Their shadows on the wet walls looked monstrous in the wand light. The tunnel was quiet as the grave, and the first unexpected sound they heard was a loud crunch as Harry stepped on what turned out to be a rat's skull. Chris lowered her wand to look at the floor and saw that it was littered with small animal bones. Trying very hard not to imagine what Ginny might look like if they found her, Chris led the way forward around a dark bend in the tunnel. "Chris, there's something up there," said Harry hoarsely. They froze, watching. Chris could just see the outline of something huge and curved, lying right across the tunnel. It wasn't moving. "Do you think it's asleep?" Harry breathed, glancing at Chris. Chris didn't answer. She edged forward, her wand held high. The light slid over a gigantic snakeskin of a vivid, poisonous green, lying curled and empty across the tunnel floor. The creature that had shed it must have been 20 feet long at least. Harry's jaw dropped. He held a hand out and was about to touch. "Don't touch it, it's poisonous," Chris said with annoyed tone. Harry immediately withdrew his hand. "Sorry." They set off past the giant snakeskin. The tunnel turned and turned again. Then at last, as they crept around yet another bend, they saw a solid wall ahead on which 2 entwined serpents were carved, their eyes set with great glinting emeralds. "Well, I think it's good you came with me," Chris said and pointed towards the wall. Harry nodded, then approached. "Wait," Chris stopped him. "Before we enter, you're a parcel tongue, so if you feel any kind of feeling that the basilisk is near us, alert me and close your eyes." "Okay," Harry said, then looked at the wall, his throat very dry. There was no need to pretend these stone snakes were real. Their eyes looked strangely alive. He cleared his throat and the emerald eyes seemed to flicker. Harry said something in a low, faint hiss. The serpents parted as the wall cracked open, the halves slid smoothly out of sight, then they walked inside. They were standing at the end of a very long, dimly lit chamber. Towering stone pillars entwined with more carved serpents rose to support a ceiling lost in darkness, casting long black shadows through the odd greenish gloom that filled the place. "Of course, Salazar Slytherin and cold dark rooms," Chris sighed. Someone should have told him that it's really very creepy. Harry was looking around. Every careful footstep echoed loudly off the shadowy walls. They kept their eyes narrowed, ready to clamp them shut at the smallest sign of movement. The hollow eye sockets of the stone snakes seemed to be following them. Then, as they drew level with the last pair of pillars, a statue high as the chamber itself loomed into view, standing against the back wall. It's a giant face above. It was ancient and monkeyish, with a long, thin beard that fell almost to the bottom of the wizard's sweeping stone robes, where 2 enormous gray feet stood on the smooth chamber floor. Salazar Slytherin. Chris remembered her dreams. The Salazar Slytherin was same. She was thinking about how was it possible when she saw between the gray feet, face down, lay a small black-robed figure with flaming red hair. "Ginny!" Harry muttered, sprinting to her and dropping to his knees. "Ginny, don't be dead. Please don't be dead." He flung his wand aside, grabbed Ginny's shoulders and turned her over. Her face was white as marble and yet her eyes were closed, so she wasn't petrified. Chris slowly came beside them, picked up Harry's wand and then looked around. When she saw a tall black-haired boy was leaning against the nearest pillar, watching, he was strangely blurred around the edges, as though Chris were looking at him through a misted window. "So, you must be Tom Riddle," Chris said, looking at him. Harry jumped and spun around on his knees. "And you must be Christina Norton." Riddle smiled. Tom Riddle?" Harry blurted out. "But he was... You're... a memory. How can you... A memory?" "Yes. Preserved in a diary for 50 years. "And you're?" Riddle asked, looking at Harry. Then he noticed his forehead, his scar. "Of course. You're Harry Potter. Ginny told me everything about you. How you, a skinny boy with no extraordinary magical talent, managed to defeat the greatest wizard of all time. How you escaped with nothing but a scar while Lord Voldemort's powers were destroyed." There was an odd red gleam in his hungry eyes now. Harry said slowly, "But Voldemort was after your time." "Voldemort," said Riddle softly, "is my past, present, and future, Harry Potter. Because I'm Lord Voldemort, it was a name I was already using at Hogwarts, to my most intimate friends only, of course. You think I was going to use my filthy Muggle father's name forever? I, in whose veins runs the blood of Salazar Slytherin himself, through my mother's side, I keep the name of a foul, common Muggle, who abandoned me even before I was born. Just because he found out his wife was a witch? No, Harry, I fashioned myself a new name, a name I knew wizards everywhere would one day fear to speak when I had become the greatest sorcerer in the world." Harry stared numbly at Riddle. "Not everyone feared to speak your name, Voldemort," Chris said. Riddle flinched a little at her words, then his face changed into a smile. "Well, you see, I was also interested to meet you, Christina Norton." He turned towards Chris. "After all, you almost failed my plan. You understood my diary and warned Ginny not to write. Well, now tell us what you've done to Ginny." Chris said. "She's still alive," said Riddle, "but only just." "What'll you get if she dies?" she said. "See, that's the reason I wanted to meet you. I realized you're same age as Ginny, but a little smarter than her. You can understand things without saying, unlike her." Riddle said softly. "Ginny poured out her soul to me, and her soul happened to be exactly what I wanted. I grew stronger on a diet of her deepest fears, her darkest secrets. I grew powerful, far more powerful than little Miss Weasley. Yes, and as soon as Ginny will die, Lord Voldemort will return in his power. So why don't you join me, Christina? You can be my faithful follower and I'll give you power no one can imagine. If I want power, I'll earn it. For that, I'll not abandon my friends like a coward. Tom, Chris replied, smiling. Friends? Riddle laughed, a high, cold laugh that didn't suit him. Then let me tell you what was little Ginny was writing about you in my diary, he recited. Dear Tom, Chris is very confident and smart. She doesn't have to worry about anything. She gets everything she wants. She is so popular, she made friends with Harry in no time. Do you think Harry will notice me ever? Even my brother Ron says to me that I should be more confident like Chris. She stands up for herself, I can't even able do that. Chris' face became expressionless. Harry looked back forth between her and Voldemort. You see, it's very boring having to listen to the silly little troubles of an 11-year-old girl, he went on, but I was patient. I wrote back. I was sympathetic. I was kind. I knew jealousy is a great weapon to mend people's mind. So I explained to her that it's your fault that she doesn't have anything. It's you who snatched everything from her and she trusted me. Ginny simply loved me. No one's ever understood me like you, Tom. I'm so glad I've got this diary to confide in. It's like having a friend I can carry around in my pocket. But soon when she started to losing her memory, she became suspicious about the diary and tried to throw it, but then you found it, and when Ginny saw it, she thought, I'm going to tell you everything, so she stole it. You understood this and tried to stop her, but I had already told her that you'll turn her in for opening the chamber. She will be expelled because of you and only I can help her, and she believed me. Chris clenched her fist. She is just a jealous, stupid little girl. Christina, but you're different. So now, think. Does she deserve to be saved? Are you willing to give your life for her? Is she worth it? He stopped and looked into Chris's eyes. You can be powerful, Christina. You just need to see this world like I do. You'll be just like me. There was a long silence. Harry was looking terrified. Riddle was smiling and Chris was staring at Ginny with an expressionless face. No, Tom, I never will. I'll never see the world like you. Because I try to see goodness in every people. But unfortunately, there is not a drop left inside you. And sorry to disappoint you, but I don't think you're a great powerful wizard or anything. Because if you were, then you didn't need an 11-year-old little girl's soul to come back in power. Chris said with steady and firm voice, looking straight into his eyes. The smile had gone from Riddle's face, to be replaced by a very ugly look. Harry sighed with relief. I thought you're smarter than this. But now I'm going to teach you a little lesson. Let's match the powers of Lord Voldemort, heir of Salazar Slytherin, against famous Harry Potter, an 11-year-old student. Riddle said and gave a waffle smile. Trust me, Tom, I'll not die today, Chris whispered as Riddle walked away. Riddle stopped between the high pillars and looked up into the stone face of Slytherin, high above him in the half-darkness. Riddle opened his mouth wide and hissed. Chris came close to Harry. Tell me what's he saying, she whispered in Harry's ear. Okay, he is saying, speak to me, Slytherin. Greatest of the Hogwarts Four. Harry said, looking horrified. Suddenly, Slytherin's gigantic stone face was moving, his mouth opening, wider and wider, to make a huge black hole, and something was stirring inside the statue's mouth. Something was slithering up from its... Close your eyes. Close your eyes. He is calling the basilisk, Chris said urgently and closed her eyes. Harry did the same. Chris heard something huge hit the stone floor of the chamber. She knew what was happening. She could sense it, could almost see the giant serpent uncoiling itself from Slytherin's mouth. Then he heard Riddle's hissing voice and Harry said, he asked it to kill us. Then what are waiting for? Run, Chris said, wheeling around and running.